Rachel Bennett's eyes flickered open as the first rays of sunlight streamed through her bedroom window. She stretched, a smile playing on her lips as she remembered what day it was. Today was the day she'd finally tackle the new trail in Pisgah, national forest she'd been hearing about for weeks. As she swung her legs out of bed, her phone buzzed with a text from her riding buddy, Mike. "Hey Rach, still on for the group ride this weekend?" Rachel hesitated for a moment before typing her reply. "Rain check on that one. I'm hitting the new trail in Pisgah today. Solo mission." Mike's response was almost immediate. "Seriously? That trail's no joke. You sure you don't want company?" Rachel rolled her eyes, her fingers flying across the screen. "I'll be fine, Mike. You know I can handle myself out there. Besides, sometimes a girl just needs some quality time with her bike in the great outdoors." All right, Mike conceded. "Just be careful, okay? And don't forget your bear spray. I heard there's been some activity in that area lately." "Yes. Dad?" Rachel typed back with a grin. "I've got my spray, first aid kit, and enough trail mix to feed a small army. I'll check in when I'm back, later." Setting her phone aside, Rachel began her familiar pre-ride routine. She pulled on her favorite riding shorts and a moisture-wicking top, laced up her well-worn trail shoes, and grabbed her hydration pack from its hook by the door. In the kitchen, she filled the pack's bladder with fresh water and tossed in a couple of energy bars for good measure. As she munched on a quick breakfast of toast and peanut butter, Rachel pulled up the trail map on her tablet, studying the route one last time. The new trail, aptly named Bear's Den, wound its way through some of the most remote parts of the forest. It was exactly the kind of challenge she'd been craving. Rachel's heart quickened with anticipation as she loaded her mountain bike onto the rack on her Subaru Outback. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and promise. It was going to be a perfect day for a ride. The drive to Pisgah National Forest took just under an hour, the landscape gradually shifting from the outskirts of Asheville to the lush green expanse of the forest. Rachel hummed along to her favorite playlist, her fingers tapping out the rhythm on the steering wheel. As she pulled into the small parking area at the trailhead, Rachel noticed she was the only one there. Perfect, she thought. The trail would be all hers. She unloaded her bike with practiced ease, double-checking her tire pressure and giving the suspension a quick bounce test. Satisfied that everything was in order, Rachel clipped on her helmet and adjusted her sunglasses. Just as she was about to set off, a gruff voice called out, "Heading out alone today, miss?" Rachel turned to see an older man in a park ranger uniform approaching her. His weathered face creased with concern as he eyed her bike and solo status. "Yes, sir," Rachel replied with a confident smile. "Just me and the trail today." The ranger nodded slowly. "Well, you look like you know what you're doing, but I'd be remiss if I didn't warn you. We've had increased bear activity in the area lately, black bears mostly. They usually keep to themselves, but it's always good to be prepared." Rachel patted the bear spray canister attached to her pack. "Got it covered. I've had my fair share of wildlife encounters before." "Good to hear," the ranger said, visibly relieved. "Just remember, if you do run into a bear, make yourself look big, make noise, and back away slowly. Don't run and don't turn your back on it." "I appreciate the advice," Rachel said, straddling her bike. "I'll keep my eyes peeled and my wits about me." The ranger tipped his hat. "Enjoy your ride and stay safe out there." With a final wave, Rachel pushed off, her tires crunching on the gravel as she made her way to the trailhead. The forest seemed to welcome her, the canopy of leaves overhead creating a dappled pattern of sunlight on the path before her. As she pedaled deeper into the woods, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. Rachel felt the familiar rush of endorphins as she picked up speed, navigating the twists and turns of the trail with practiced ease. The first few miles flew by in a blur of green and brown. Rachel's muscles warmed up, falling into the familiar rhythm of climb and descent. She relished the burn in her quads as she tackled a particularly steep section, the satisfaction of conquering each obstacle fueling her onwards. About an hour into her ride, Rachel came across the first of the warning signs the ranger had mentioned. A bright yellow placard nailed to a tree read, "Caution, bear activity in area. Stay alert and follow safety guidelines." Rachel slowed her pace, her senses heightening as she scanned the surrounding forest. The woods suddenly seemed darker, the shadows deeper and more menacing. She shook her head, trying to dispel the creeping sense of unease. "You've dealt with wildlife before," she reminded herself. "This is their home, and you're just a visitor." Pushing onwards, Rachel found herself entering a particularly dense section of the forest. The trail narrowed, hemmed in on both sides by thick underbrush. The canopy overhead grew denser, blocking out much of the sunlight and casting the path in a greenish gloom. As she navigated a tricky series of switchbacks, Rachel's mind wandered to the stories she'd heard about this part of the trail. Local riders spoke of it in hushed tones, describing close encounters with wildlife and the eerie feeling of being watched. She'd always laughed off such tales as trailside gossip, but now, alone in the heart of the forest, they didn't seem quite so far-fetched. A sudden movement in her peripheral vision caused Rachel to brake hard, her heart leaping into her throat. She whipped her head around, eyes straining to penetrate the thick foliage. For a moment all was still. Then a squirrel darted across the trail, chattering indignantly as it disappeared into the underbrush. Rachel let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through her. "Get it together, Bennett," she muttered to herself. "You're jumping at shadows now." Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Rachel pushed off once more. She was determined to finish this trail, bear warnings or no bear warnings. After all, what were the odds of actually running into a bear? Probably about the same as winning the lottery, she reasoned. As the trail began to climb again, Rachel settled back into her rhythm, the earlier tension melting away with each turn of the pedals. The forest around her seemed to come alive, teeming with the small sounds and movements of woodland creatures going about their day. She was so focused on the trail ahead and the exhilaration of the ride that she almost missed the sign marking the halfway point of the Bear's Den trail. Rachel grinned as she sailed past it, a sense of accomplishment washing over her. She was making good time, and the most challenging part of the trail was still to come. Little did Rachel know, as she rounded the next bend with renewed enthusiasm, that her true test was waiting just ahead. The forest held its breath, and somewhere in the green depths, a pair of dark eyes watched and waited as Rachel pedaled. Deeper into the heart of Pisgah National Forest, the trail began to narrow, winding its way through increasingly dense undergrowth. The canopy overhead thickened, dappling the path with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air grew cooler, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves and rich soil. Rachel's earlier excitement had given way to a focused determination. She navigated a series of challenging switchbacks, her muscles burning pleasantly with the effort. The bike responded to her every command, an extension of her body as she leaned into each turn. Rounding a particularly sharp bend, Rachel caught sight of something that made her pulse quicken. Ahead, nailed to a gnarled old oak, was another warning sign. This one was larger and more detailed than the last, its yellow surface standing out starkly against the muted greens and browns of the forest. Rachel slowed to a stop, her tires crunching softly on the leaf-strewn trail. She took a long pull from her hydration pack as she studied the sign. Warning: active bear area. Black bears have been frequently sighted in this region. Keep food sealed and store properly. Make noise while traveling to avoid surprising bears. If you encounter a bear, do not run. Back away slowly while facing the bear. Use bear spray only if charged. Report all bear sightings to park rangers. Below the text was a stark silhouette of a bear, its hulking form a reminder of the raw power these creatures possessed. Rachel chewed her lower lip, a tendril of doubt curling in her stomach. She glanced back the way she'd come, considering her options. The sensible thing would be to turn back now, to leave the deeper parts of the forest to their wild inhabitants. But the trail ahead beckoned, promising the kind of challenge and solitude she'd been craving. Rachel had always prided herself on her self-reliance and ability to handle whatever nature threw her way. Was she really going to let a simple warning sign derail her plans? "Come on, Bennett," she muttered to herself. "You've come this far. No turning back now." With a determined set to her jaw, Rachel pushed off once more, but as she rode on, she couldn't shake the prickle of unease at the base of her skull. Her senses seemed to sharpen, every snapping twig and rustling leaf drawing her attention. The trail dipped into a small ravine, the path bordered on one side by a steep embankment, and on the other by a babbling stream. As she navigated this tricky section, Rachel's mind wandered to the bear safety briefing she'd attended last year. The ranger's voice echoed in her memory. Black bears are generally shy and prefer to avoid humans, but they're curious creatures, and they've got excellent noses. Always keep your food sealed tight and stored properly. Rachel patted her pack, reassuring herself that her trail mix and energy bars were securely zipped away. She'd always been meticulous about leave-no-trace principles, but now she was doubly glad of her caution. As the trail climbed out of the ravine, Rachel found herself in a small clearing. Sunlight streamed down, a welcome change from the dim forest. She decided to take a quick break, dismounting and leaning her bike against a fallen log. Stretching her arms overhead, Rachel took in her surroundings. The clearing was picturesque, ringed by towering pines and dotted with wildflowers, but something felt off. An unnatural stillness hung in the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Rachel's gaze fell on a clump of bushes at the edge of the clearing. The leaves were bent and broken in an odd pattern. Curiosity overrode caution, and she stepped closer to investigate. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the distinctive five-toed print pressed into the soft earth. A bear track, and a fresh one at that. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. "Okay," Rachel whispered, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet clearing. "Okay, this is fine. Bears live here. It's their home. I'm just passing through." She backed away slowly, her eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The forest remained still, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She returned to her bike, hands trembling slightly as she checked her bear spray, ensuring it was easily accessible. As she prepared to set off again, a flash of color caught her eye. Tucked behind the log where she'd rested her bike was a crumpled energy bar wrapper. Rachel's brow furrowed. She always packed out her trash, and she hadn't eaten anything yet today. The implication hit her like a bucket of ice water. Someone else had been here recently, and they'd left behind food waste. In bear country, that was tantamount to ringing a dinner bell. "Damn it," Rachel hissed, quickly retrieving the wrapper. She stuffed it into a zippered pocket of her pack, resolving to dispose of it properly later. With a final wary glance around the clearing, Rachel mounted her bike and pushed on. The trail narrowed once more, winding its way through a stand of ancient hemlocks. Their massive trunks rose like pillars around her, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. As she rode, Rachel found herself making more noise than usual. She hummed quietly, then, with increasing volume, the sound of her own voice was comforting in the oppressive silence of the deep forest. "Hey, bear!" she called out, feeling slightly foolish, but determined to make her presence known. "Just passing through, no need to come check me out." The trail took a sharp turn, revealing a steep uphill section ahead. Rachel geared down, preparing for the climb. As she rounded the bend, movement caught her eye. Something large and dark disappeared into the underbrush just off the trail. Rachel's heart leaped into her throat. She slammed on her brakes, skidding to a stop in a shower of leaves and pine needles. For a long moment she sat frozen, straining her ears for any sound of approach. Nothing, just the soft whisper of wind through the trees and the pounding of her own heart. It was probably just a deer, Rachel told herself, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Or maybe a really big raccoon, yeah, that's it, a raccoon on steroids. She laughed nervously at her own joke, the sound brittle in the still air. Taking a deep breath, Rachel forced herself to relax her white-knuckled grip on the handlebars. "Get it together," she muttered. "You're more likely to hurt yourself panicking than you are to run into a bear." With that, Rachel steeled herself and began the climb. The exertion helped calm her nerves, focusing her attention on the burn in her muscles and the rhythm of her breathing. By the time she crested the hill, the earlier scare had faded to a dim memory. The trail leveled out, offering a stunning view of the surrounding forest. Rachel paused for a moment, drinking in the sight. Miles of unbroken green stretched in every direction, a testament to the vastness of Pisgah National Forest. As she gazed out over the landscape, a flicker of movement in the valley below caught her attention. Rachel squinted, trying to make out details. Was that? Yes, it was definitely an animal. something large, moving with surprising grace through the underbrush. Rachel fumbled for her phone, hands shaking with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She managed to zoom in just as the creature emerged into a small clearing. Her breath caught in her throat. There, in living color on her phone screen, was a black bear. It was smaller than she'd imagined, probably a young adult, its glossy coat catching the sunlight as it ambled through the clearing. For a moment, Rachel forgot her fear, captivated by the bear's natural beauty and power. This was why she came out here after all. To experience nature in its purest form, to feel that connection to something wild and untamed. Then the bear raised its head, its nose twitching as it sampled the air. Almost as if it could feel Rachel's gaze, it turned, looking directly up at her position on the ridge. Rachel's finger instinctively pressed the capture button, snapping a photo just as her brain registered the potential danger of the situation. She quickly pocketed her phone and backed away from the overlook, her heart racing. "Okay, that's enough nature communion for one day," she muttered, swinging a leg over her bike. Time to finish this trail and get back to civilization. As Rachel pushed off, continuing deeper into the forest, she was unaware that her encounter was far from over. The bear, its curiosity piqued by this strange, two-wheeled intruder, had begun to follow her trail. The real test of Rachel's nerve and skill still lay ahead, waiting in the shadowy depths of Pisgah National Forest. 2 hours into her ride, Rachel's earlier trepidation had given way to a rhythm of exertion and focus. The trail had become increasingly technical, demanding her full attention as she navigated rocky outcroppings and tight switchbacks. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her muscles burned pleasantly with the effort. As she rounded a bend, the sound of running water reached her ears. The trail opened up into a small clearing, bisected by a clear, babbling stream. Rachel's parched throat reminded her that it had been a while since her last water break. "Perfect timing," she murmured, bringing her bike to a stop near the water's edge. Rachel dismounted, her legs a bit wobbly after the long ride. She stretched, arching her back and rolling her shoulders to work out the kinks. The cool forest air felt heavenly on her flushed skin. Unclipping her water bottle from the bike frame, Rachel knelt by the stream. The water looked crisp and inviting, but she knew better than to drink directly from it, no matter how clean it appeared. Instead, she refilled her bottle through a portable filter, taking care not to disturb the delicate ecosystem around the bank. As she waited for the bottle to fill, Rachel took in her surroundings. The clearing was picturesque, sunlight dappling through the canopy overhead and reflecting off the rippling surface of the stream. Wildflowers dotted the grassy banks, adding splashes of color to the predominantly green landscape. "Now this is more like it," Rachel said to herself, a smile playing on her lips. The serenity of the scene helped ease the lingering tension from her earlier bear sighting. With her water bottle full, Rachel moved to a large, flat rock near the stream's edge. She sat down, grateful for the chance to rest on something other than her bike seat. Rummaging through her pack, she pulled out an energy bar and took a big bite, savoring the mix of nuts and dried fruit. As she ate, Rachel's mind wandered back to the bear she'd seen earlier. She pulled out her phone, curious to see if she'd managed to capture a decent shot. The photo was a bit grainy due to the distance, but there it was, unmistakably a black bear, its head turned towards the camera as if posing for the shot. "Well, he'll be damned," Rachel chuckled. "Wait till Mike sees this. He'll never believe I managed to spot a bear and not freak out completely." She was about to put her phone away when she noticed the lack of signal bars. Of course, she was deep in the forest now, well out of range of any cell towers. The realization sent a small shiver down her spine. She was truly alone out here. Shaking off the momentary unease, Rachel finished her snack and carefully stowed the wrapper in her pack. She'd seen the results of careless hikers leaving food scraps behind, and she had no intention of attracting any ursine visitors to this lovely spot. As she prepared to set off again, a rustling in the underbrush across the stream caught her attention. Rachel froze, her hand instinctively moving to the bear spray canister on her belt. The rustling grew louder, accompanied by the snap of twigs. Whatever was moving through the brush was large, too large to be a squirrel or raccoon. Rachel's heart began to race, her earlier encounter with the bear fresh in her mind. "Hey!" she called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Hello? Any humans out there?" The rustling stopped abruptly. For a long moment, the clearing was eerily silent, save for the gentle gurgle of the stream. Then, with a final crash of vegetation, a startled deer burst from the underbrush. It paused for a split second, regarding Rachel with wide, liquid eyes, before bounding across the clearing and disappearing into the forest on the other side. Rachel let out a long, shaky breath, equal parts relief and embarrassment flooding through her. "Get a grip, Bennett," she admonished herself. "At this rate, you'll give yourself a heart attack before you even see another bear." Still, the incident left her feeling unsettled. The forest, which had seemed so welcoming earlier, now felt oppressive. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, and every rustle of leaves sounded ominous. "All right, time to move on," Rachel muttered, swinging her leg over her bike. "Sooner I finish this trail, sooner I can be back in civilization, bragging about my bear sighting over a cold beer." As she pushed off, pedaling back onto the main trail, Rachel failed to notice a set of fresh tracks in the soft mud near the stream, tracks far too large to belong to a deer. The trail narrowed as it led away from the stream, the underbrush pressing in close on either side. Rachel found herself constantly scanning the edges of the path, her imagination conjuring bear-shaped shadows in every cluster of ferns. To distract herself, Rachel began to hum, the tune gradually morphing into words. "I'm just a girl riding through the woods," she sang softly, making up the lyrics as she went. "Definitely not a tasty bear snack. No siree, nothing to eat here, Mr. Bear. Just a sweaty, probably gross-tasting human passing through." Her impromptu song was interrupted by a sound that made her blood run cold, a low huffing grunt coming from somewhere off to her left. Rachel's hands clenched on the handlebars, her knuckles turning white. That was no deer sound. "Hello?" she called out, hating how small and scared her voice sounded. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her. Rachel remained still, straining her ears for any further noise. After a few tense moments, she heard it again, the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the underbrush, this time closer to the trail. Every instinct screamed at Rachel to flee, to pedal as fast as she could away from whatever was lurking in the shadows. But the rational part of her brain, the part that had paid attention during all those trail safety seminars, knew that sudden movements could provoke a predator's chase response. Okay, think, Rachel whispered to herself. What did that ranger say? Make yourself look big, make noise, back away slowly. Carefully, Rachel dismounted from her bike, never taking her eyes off the spot where she'd heard the noise. She raised her arms, holding the bike in front of her like a shield. "Hey, Bear," she shouted, her voice stronger now, fueled by adrenaline. "I see you there. I'm just passing through, no need to bother with me." The rustling stopped. For a heart-stopping moment, Rachel thought she glimpsed a dark shape moving behind a large fern. Then, with a crash of vegetation, whatever it was moved away, retreating deeper into the forest. Rachel remained frozen in place, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it must be audible. Slowly, the normal sounds of the forest returned. Birdsong, the rustle of wind through leaves, the distant chatter of a squirrel. "Holy shit," Rachel breathed, her legs suddenly feeling like jelly. Holy shit, that was close. She wanted nothing more than to get back on her bike and ride as fast as she could back the way she'd come. But she knew that would be dangerous. The trail was too technical for high speeds, and in her current state she was liable to make a mistake and injure herself. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Rachel forced herself to calm down. "You're okay," she told herself firmly. "It's gone now, probably just as scared of you as you were of it." With trembling hands, she checked her bear spray, ensuring it was easily accessible. Then, moving slowly and deliberately, she remounted her bike. "All right, let's get out of here," Rachel murmured, pushing off with renewed determination. "Nice. And easy does it. No sudden movements, no panic. You've got this, Bennett." As she rode on, Rachel remained hyper-aware of her surroundings, every sense on high alert. The forest seemed to have taken on a menacing quality, shadows deeper and more numerous than before. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, followed. Little did Rachel know, her instincts were correct. In the dense undergrowth, Parallel to the trail, a large shape moved silently, keeping pace with her bike. The bear, its curiosity piqued by this strange intruder in its territory, shadowed Rachel's progress, waiting for an opportunity to investigate further. The real confrontation was yet to come, as Rachel pedaled onward, unaware of the danger that lurked just out of sight. The forest had grown denser as Rachel continued her ride, the canopy overhead knitting together to block out much of the sunlight. Shadows deepened, and the air took on a cooler, damper quality. The trail twisted and turned through the undergrowth, demanding Rachel's full attention as she navigated increasingly technical terrain. Despite the challenging ride, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her since the encounter by the stream. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. She found herself constantly scanning the edges of the trail, half expecting to see a bear lumber out of the shadows at any moment. "Get it together, Bennett," she muttered to herself, ducking under a low-hanging branch. "You're letting your imagination run wild. Just focus on the trail." As if in response to her self-admonishment, the path ahead suddenly opened up. Rachel emerged from a particularly dense section of forest to find herself facing a sharp bend in the trail. Beyond it, she could see the path widening into what looked like a small clearing. Relief washed over her at the prospect of a more open space. "Finally," she breathed, allowing herself a small smile. "A chance to catch my breath without feeling like I'm in a green tunnel." Rachel leaned into the turn, her tires gripping the dirt as she rounded the bend. As the clearing came into full view, her sense of relief evaporated instantly. There, standing directly in the middle of the trail, was a large black bear. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Rachel's brain struggled to process the scene before her. The bear was much larger than she had imagined, its powerful body covered in thick, glossy black fur. It stood on all fours, its head lowered as it sniffed at something on the ground. For a split second, Rachel's mind flashed to the crumpled energy bar wrapper she had found earlier. Had someone's carelessness led to this moment? The bear, alerted by the sound of Rachel's approach, raised its head. Their eyes met, and Rachel felt a primal fear surge through her body. This was no longer a theoretical danger or a distant sighting. This was real, immediate, and terrifying. Rachel's hands clenched on her brake levers, bringing her bike to a skidding halt. The sudden movement and noise startled the bear, which reared up on its hind legs, letting out a warning huff. "Oh shit. Oh shit, oh shit," Rachel whispered, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every safety tip she had ever learned about bear encounters seemed to evaporate from her mind, leaving only blank panic. The bear dropped back to all fours, taking a tentative step towards Rachel. It seemed more curious than aggressive, but that did little to calm Rachel's nerves. She knew that a bear's mood could change in an instant. Slowly, Rachel began to dismount from her bike, remembering that she needed to make herself appear larger. Her legs felt like jelly, barely supporting her weight as she stood. "Hey, bear," she called out, her voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. "I see you there. I'm just passing through. No need to bother with me." The bear tilted its head, seemingly puzzled by Rachel's voice. It took another step forward, its nose twitching as it caught her scent. Rachel's hand moved to the bear spray canister on her belt, unclipping it with trembling fingers. She raised her other arm high, holding her bike as a makeshift barrier between herself and the bear. "Back off," she shouted, trying to inject confidence into her voice. "You don't want any trouble, and neither do I. Let's just go our separate ways, okay?" The bear huffed again, shifting its weight from paw to paw. It seemed unsure, caught between curiosity and caution. Rachel knew this moment was critical. Any wrong move could provoke an attack. Keeping her eyes on the bear, Rachel began to slowly back away. She moved her feet carefully, hyper-aware of every twig and stone beneath them. The last thing she needed now was to trip and fall. "That's right," she said, her voice a mix of soothing and firm. "You stay there and I'll just be on my way. No hard feelings, big guy. This is your home after all. I'm just a visitor." The bear watched her retreat, its dark eyes unreadable. For a moment, Rachel dared to hope that it would simply lose interest and wander back into the forest. Then, without warning, the bear dropped its head and charged. Rachel's world narrowed to a tunnel of pure, unadulterated terror. The bear's powerful legs ate up the distance between them with frightening speed. She could hear its huffing breaths, see the muscles rippling under its fur. Training and instinct took over, where conscious thought failed. Rachel's thumb found the trigger of the bear spray and she aimed it at the oncoming animal. "No!" she screamed, depressing the trigger. A cloud of orangey mist erupted from the canister, expanding rapidly in the air between her and the charging bear. The effect was almost instantaneous. The bear ran headlong into the cloud of capsaicin spray, letting out a roar of surprise and pain. It reared up, pawing at its face and snout, clearly distressed by the burning sensation. Rachel didn't wait to see what would happen next. Still clutching her bike with one hand and the bear spray with the other, she turned and ran. The bike bounced awkwardly beside her, its handlebars catching on bushes and small trees, but she didn't dare let it go. It was her only means of escape, if she could put enough distance between herself and the bear. She ran blindly, no longer following the trail, simply trying to put as much space and as many obstacles between herself and the enraged animal as possible. Branches whipped at her, face and arms leaving stinging welts, but Rachel barely noticed. The sound of her own ragged breathing and pounding heart filled her ears, drowning out everything else. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute or two, Rachel risked a glance over her shoulder. To her immense relief, there was no sign of the bear pursuing her. The forest behind her was still and quiet, disturbed only by the trail of broken vegetation she had left in her wake. Rachel slowed to a stop, her lungs burning as she gulped in air. She leaned heavily on her bike, using it to support her trembling legs. As the immediate danger passed, the full impact of what had just happened hit her like a physical blow. "Oh my God," she gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "Oh my God, I almost died. That bear, it could have..." She couldn't finish the thought. Her legs gave out and she sank to the forest floor, her back against a tree trunk. The bear spray canister slipped from her nerveless fingers, landing with a soft thud on the leaf litter. For several long minutes, Rachel simply sat there, shaking and crying quietly. The forest around her gradually returned to life, birds resuming their songs and small creatures rustling in the underbrush. The normalcy of it all seemed absurd after what she had just experienced. As her tears subsided and her breathing steadied, Rachel's survival instincts began to reassert themselves. She couldn't stay here. She was off the trail in unfamiliar territory, and there was no guarantee the bear wouldn't come looking for her once the effects of the spray wore off. With effort, Rachel pushed herself to her feet, retrieving the bear spray and clipping it back onto her belt. She took stock of her surroundings, trying to orient herself. The ground sloped gently downhill to her right, and she could hear the faint sound of running water in that direction. "Okay," she said aloud, her voice hoarse. "Okay, Bennett. You're not out of this yet. Find the stream, follow it downhill. It'll lead you back to the trail eventually." Rachel took a deep, steadying breath, then began to push her bike through the underbrush. As she moved, she remained acutely aware of every sound, every movement in the forest around her. The encounter had left her rattled, and she knew the danger was far from over. Somewhere behind her, deeper in the forest, a twig snapped under a heavy paw. The bear, its face still burning from the spray, had picked up Rachel's scent. Driven by a mix of pain, confusion, and instinctive aggression, it began to follow her trail. The chase was on, though Rachel, pushing her way through the dense forest, had no idea that her ordeal was far from over. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she pushed her bike through the dense underbrush, her eyes darting frantically from side to side. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a harbinger of danger. The forest, once a place of solace and adventure, had transformed into a green labyrinth of fear. "Keep it together, Bennett," she muttered through gritted teeth, wincing as a thorny branch scraped across her arm. "Just find the trail, and you can get out of here." The sound of running water grew louder as Rachel pressed on, offering a beacon of hope in the disorienting wilderness. She followed it doggedly, her bike catching on roots and vines, slowing her progress. Part of her wanted to abandon the machine, to flee unencumbered through the woods, but she knew it was her best chance of covering ground quickly if she made it back to the trail. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet gave way. Rachel let out a startled cry as she slid down a steep, muddy embankment, her bike tumbling after her. She landed hard at the bottom, the breath knocked from her lungs, leaves and twigs tangled in her hair. For a moment, Rachel lay there, dazed and winded. Then the memory of the bear's charge flooded back, and she scrambled to her feet, ignoring the protests of her bruised body. "Shit, shit, shit," she hissed, looking around wildly. Her bike lay a few feet away, its front wheel bent at an awkward angle. Beyond it, a small stream burbled cheerfully, oblivious to her plight. Rachel limped over to her bike, her ankle twinging with each step. She grabbed the handlebars and tried to lift it, but the bent wheel jammed against the frame. "No, no, no," she groaned, frustration and fear battling for dominance. "Come on, you can't do this to me now." A low huffing grunt from somewhere up the embankment froze the blood in her veins. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. There, at the top of the slope she had just tumbled down, stood the bear. Its fur was matted and damp, likely from rolling on the ground to alleviate the sting of the bear spray. But its eyes were clear now, fixed on Rachel with an intensity that made her feel like prey for the first time in her life. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as human and bear regarded each other. Rachel's mind raced, recalling fragments of advice from ranger talks and wilderness guides. "Don't run," she whispered to herself, even as every fiber of her being screamed at her to flee. "Don't turn your back. Make yourself big." With trembling hands, Rachel raised her arms, still gripping her bike's handlebars. The movement sent a jolt of pain through her shoulder, but she ignored it, focusing all her attention on the bear. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Hey, bear, you don't want to do this. Back off." The bear huffed again, taking a lumbering step down the embankment. Leaves and twigs crunched under its massive paws, each sound like a gunshot in Rachel's ears. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. The bear spray was still clipped to her belt, but she doubted it would be as effective a second time. The animal was angry now, driven by pain and confusion, its natural wariness of humans overridden by aggression. Rachel's gaze darted around, searching for an escape route. The stream behind her was shallow, offering no refuge. The undergrowth on either side was thick, promising to slow her down if she tried to run. Her only hope seemed to be to stand her ground and hope the bear would back down. Come on," she muttered, her voice rising in pitch as the bear took another step towards her. "What did that ranger say?" "Noise, yeah, make lots of noise." Taking a deep breath, Rachel began to shout at the top of her lungs. "Hey! Hey! Get out of here, go on, get!" She punctuated each word by slamming her palm against her bike's frame, creating a cacophony of human voice and metallic clanging. The sudden outburst gave the bear pause. It stopped its advance, cocking its head to the side as if puzzled by this new development. For a brief, hopeful moment, Rachel thought it might turn and leave. Then, with a roar that seemed to shake the very air, the bear charged. Rachel's world narrowed to a tunnel of pure, instinctive fear. Without conscious thought, she pivoted and ran, abandoning her bike and sprinting towards the stream. Her injured ankles screamed in protest, but adrenaline dulled the pain to a distant throb. The sound of the bear's pursuit filled her ears, heavy paws thudding against the earth, branches snapping, its huffing breaths growing closer with each passing second. Rachel knew with a certainty that chilled her to her core that she couldn't outrun it. As her feet hit the shallow water of the stream, a desperate plan formed in her mind. She'd heard that bears, for all their strength, weren't the most agile creatures. Maybe, just maybe, if she could change direction quickly enough. Rachel waited until she felt the bear's presence looming directly behind her. Then, summoning every ounce of strength and agility she possessed, she pivoted sharply to the right, leaping towards the stream bank. The maneuver caught the bear by surprise. Its momentum carried it past Rachel, massive paws slipping on the smooth stones of the stream bed. It let out a confused roar, trying to turn and reorient on its quarry. Rachel scrambled up the bank, her hands scrabbling for purchase on roots and rocks. She risked a glance over her shoulder and immediately wished she hadn't. The bear had recovered its footing and was charging up the bank after her, covering ground with terrifying speed. "No!" Rachel screamed, more in defiance than fear. She reached for her bear spray, knowing it was likely futile but unwilling to give up without a fight. Her fingers had just closed around the canister when her foot slipped on a patch of wet leaves. Rachel felt herself falling backwards, arms pinwheeling uselessly. Time seemed to slow as she saw the bear loom over her, its massive jaws open in a roar she felt more than heard. Then, impact. Rachel's back slammed against the forest floor, driving, the air from her lungs. Spots danced in her vision as she gasped for breath, waiting for the crushing weight of the bear to descend upon her. But the fatal blow never came. Instead, Rachel became aware of a new sound, a deep, resonant belling that cut through the air like a physical force. The bear, poised to strike, suddenly reared back on its hind legs, its attention diverted. Through the haze of fear and adrenaline, Rachel's mind struggled to place the sound. It wasn't until she saw the bear turn and lumber quickly away that recognition dawned. "A train," she wheezed, propping herself up on her elbows. "That's a train whistle." Sure enough, the long, mournful sound echoed through the forest again. It was distant but clear. Civilization, tantalizingly close yet still out of reach. Rachel lay there for several long moments, her chest heaving as she gulped in air. Tears of relief and lingering terror streaked her dirt-smudged face. She was alive. Battered, bruised, and scared out of her wits, but alive. As the initial shock began to wear off, pain made itself known. Her ankle throbbed, likely sprained in her headlong flight. Cuts and scrapes stung all over her body, and she could feel the beginnings of what promised to be spectacular bruises from her fall. Slowly, gingerly, Rachel pushed herself to a sitting position. She looked around, half expecting to see the bear, lurking nearby. But the forest was quiet now, disturbed only by the occasional distant whistle of the train. "Okay," Rachel said aloud, her voice shaky but gaining strength. "Okay, Bennett. You're not done yet. That train track is your ticket. Out of here, find it, follow it, get help." With a groan of pain, Rachel got to her feet. She took stock of her situation. No bike, no water, but she still had her bear spray and the clothes on her back. It would have to be enough. Orienting herself towards the sound of the train, Rachel took a tentative step forward. Her ankle protested but held her weight. She nodded grimly, setting her jaw with determination. "One foot in front of the other," she muttered. "Just keep moving. You've got this." As Rachel limped forward, pushing through the underbrush towards the promise of safety, she remained unaware that her ordeal was far from over. The bear, startled by the train but not driven off entirely, was already circling back. Its curiosity, and aggression far from sated, would drive it to seek out this strange two-legged intruder once more. The forest held its breath, waiting for the final act of this primal drama to unfold. Rachel limped through the dense undergrowth, each step sending a jolt of pain through her ankle. The distant sound of the train had faded, leaving her with only a vague sense of direction. The forest, which had once seemed so inviting, now felt oppressive and alien. Every shadow concealed potential danger, every rustle of leaves a possible threat. "Keep moving, Bennett," she muttered through gritted teeth. "One foot in front of the other. You can do this." Her progress was agonizingly slow. Thorny vines caught at her clothes, and low-hanging branches whipped her face and arms. Rachel's breath came in ragged gasps, a mixture of exertion and barely contained panic. The bear could be anywhere, and she had no way of knowing if it was still pursuing her. As she pushed through a particularly thick patch of ferns, Rachel's foot caught on an exposed root. She stumbled, crying out as her injured ankle gave way. She fell hard, leaves and twigs crunching beneath her. For a moment, Rachel lay there, tears of frustration and fear welling in her eyes. The urge to give up, to curl into a ball and wait for rescue was almost overwhelming. But the memory of the bear's charge, of its hot breath and gleaming teeth, spurred her on. With a groan, Rachel pushed herself to her knees. As she did, something caught her eye. A flash of unnatural color amidst the greens and browns of the forest floor. Her heart leapt. Could it be a trail marker? Crawling forward, Rachel brushed aside a clump of leaves. Her hope turned to ash in her mouth. It wasn't a trail marker, but a crumpled energy bar wrapper, the same kind she had picked up earlier. Someone else's carelessness had led the bear right to her. "Damn it," she hissed, anger momentarily overriding her fear. "Fair if I ever find out who—" Her words were cut short by a sound that turned her blood to ice, a low huffing grunt, uncomfortably close. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. There, not 20 feet away, stood the bear. It was upright. On its hind legs, its head swiveling as it sampled the air. It hadn't seen her yet, but Rachel knew that could change in an instant. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Rachel's mind raced, evaluating her options. She couldn't outrun the bear, not with her injured ankle. Climbing a tree was out of the question, for the same reason. That left standing her ground or trying to hide. As slowly and quietly as she could, Rachel began to back away. Her hand crept towards the bear spray canister on her belt, a move born more of desperation than any real hope of it being effective. A twig snapped under her palm. The bear's head whipped around, its dark eyes locking onto Rachel. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, with a roar that seemed to shake the very air, the bear dropped to all fours and charged. "No!" Rachel screamed, scrambling backwards. Her fingers fumbled with the bear spray, finally managing to unclip it from her belt. She raised it just as the bear closed the distance between them. Rachel's thumb found the trigger, and she squeezed, praying that there was enough spray left to deter the charging animal. A cloud of orange mist erupted from the canister, enveloping the bear's face. The effect was immediate. The bear reared up, pawing at its eyes and snout, roaring in pain and confusion. But unlike their first encounter, it didn't retreat. Driven by pain and aggression, it lashed out blindly. A massive paw caught Rachel across the chest, sending her flying. She slammed into a tree trunk, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Stars exploded in her vision as her head cracked against the rough bark. Dazed and gasping for breath, Rachel slid to the ground. Through blurred vision, she saw the bear shaking its head violently, trying to clear the burning spray from its eyes. It wouldn't be long before it recovered enough to attack again. With trembling hands, Rachel tried to push herself up, but her body refused to cooperate. Pain lanced through her ribs with every breath. Her head throbbed, and warm blood trickled down the side of her face. "Get up," she wheezed, willing her unresponsive limbs to move. "Get up or you're dead." The bear, still disoriented but no less dangerous, lumbered towards her. Its powerful jaws snapped at the air, searching for its elusive prey. Rachel pressed herself against the tree trunk, trying to make herself as small as possible. Just as the bear's hot breath washed over her, a new sound cut through the air, a deep, resonant belling. The train whistle, closer now than before. The bear hesitated, its head swiveling towards the noise. Rachel seized the moment, ignoring the screaming. Protest of her battered body, she lunged to the side, rolling away from the tree. The sudden movement caught the bear by surprise. It swung a paw at her, but its aim was off, still affected by the spray. Adrenaline surged through Rachel's system, temporarily dulling her pain. She scrambled to her feet and ran, her gait uneven, but driven by pure survival instinct. Behind her, she could hear the bear crashing through the underbrush in pursuit once more. The train whistle sounded again, louder and clearer. Rachel angled towards it, pushing her battered body to its limits. Branches whipped at her face, drawing thin lines of blood, but she barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to the sound of the train and the thundering footfalls of the bear behind her. Suddenly, the trees thinned. Rachel burst out of the forest onto a small rocky outcrop. Below, she could see train tracks cutting through the wilderness. Relief flooded through her. Civilization, a chance at rescue. But her moment of hope was short-lived. The bear exploded. From the tree line behind her, roaring in fury, Rachel spun to face it, her back to the edge of the outcrop. There was nowhere left to run. Time seemed to slow as the bear reared up on its hind legs, looming over her. Rachel saw every detail with preternatural clarity. The saliva dripping from its open jaws, the leaves and twigs matted in its fur, the raw intelligence in its dark eyes. In that moment, Rachel understood that this was no mindless beast, no simple force of nature. This was a thinking, feeling creature, one that had been pushed to the edge of its territory and was reacting the only way it knew how. As the bear's paw descended, Rachel made a split-second decision. She threw herself backwards off the edge of the outcrop. For a heart-stopping moment, she was in freefall. Then she hit the slope below, tumbling and sliding down the rocky incline. Pain exploded through Rachel's body as she bounced off rocks and roots. She came to a stop at the bottom, battered and barely conscious. Through a haze of pain, she saw the bear at the top of the outcrop, huffing and pacing. The ground beneath her began to vibrate. Rachel turned her head, wincing at the movement, to see a freight train approaching around a bend. With the last of her strength, she dragged herself onto the tracks, waving her arms weakly. The train's horn blared, brakes screeching as the engineer spotted her. Rachel collapsed onto the rails, her vision tunneling. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the bear turning away, disappearing back into the forest. As unconsciousness enveloped her, Rachel's last coherent thought was a mixture of relief and wonder. She had survived against all odds, but the memory of the bear's eyes, so full of wild intelligence, would stay with her forever. The train ground to a halt, and voices shouted in alarm. Help had arrived, but Rachel's ordeal had left its mark, both physical and psychological. The forest, once a place of adventure and solace, would never be the same for her again. The harsh screech of brakes and the hiss of pneumatic systems filled the air as the freight train ground to a halt. Rachel lay motionless on the tracks, her consciousness fading in and out like a weak radio signal. The world around her was a blur of sound and motion, punctuated by bursts of searing pain. "Holy shit! There's someone on the tracks!" A gruff voice called out. The sound of heavy boots on gravel approached rapidly. Rachel tried to speak, to call out for help, but all that escaped her lips was a feeble groan. Her entire body felt like one massive bruise, and the taste of copper in her mouth suggested she was bleeding internally. Rough hands gently turned her over, and Rachel found herself staring up at the concerned face of a middle-aged man in a conductor's uniform. His bushy eyebrows were furrowed with worry as he assessed her condition. Miss, can you hear me?" the conductor asked, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "Don't try to move. We're calling for help." Rachel managed a weak nod, wincing at the movement. She wanted to tell them about the bear, to warn them of the danger lurking in the forest, but she couldn't form the words. The effort of trying sent her spiraling back into unconsciousness. When Rachel next opened her eyes, she was being lifted onto a stretcher. The forest canopy above her gave way to an overcast sky as paramedics carried her towards a waiting ambulance. The flashing lights and siren wails seemed surreal after the primal quiet of the woods. Female, late 20s to early 30s, multiple lacerations and contusions, possible internal injuries. One of the paramedics rattled off to his partner. "BP is low, pulse rapid and thready. Let's get her stabilized and move out." As they loaded her into the ambulance, Rachel caught a glimpse of a cluster of train crew members and what looked like park rangers gathered nearby. They were gesturing towards the forest, their faces grave. One of the rangers was holding something. That made Rachel's heart skip a beat, the mangled remains of her mountain bike. The ambulance doors slammed shut, cutting off her view. Rachel felt a prick in her arm as one of the paramedics inserted an IV. The cool rush of saline and pain medication began to dull the edges of her agony. "Miss, can you tell me your name?" the paramedic asked, leaning over her with a penlight. Rachel licked her dry lips, tasting blood and dirt. Rachel," she managed to croak. "Rachel Bennett." "Good, Rachel. You're doing great," the paramedic said encouragingly. "Can you tell me what happened? How did you end up on the tracks?" The bear's roar echoed in Rachel's memory, and she shuddered. "Bear," she whispered. "There was a bear, chased me. I fell off a cliff, I think." The paramedic's eyebrows shot up, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Okay, Rachel. You're safe now. We're taking you to the hospital. Just try to relax and let us take care of you." As the ambulance sped towards civilization, sirens wailing, Rachel drifted in and out of consciousness. The forest flew by outside the windows, and she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in those green depths, a pair of dark eyes was watching her retreat. The next few hours passed in a blur of bright lights, concerned faces, and medical jargon. Rachel was whisked through the emergency room, subjected to a battery of tests and examinations. X-rays revealed 2 cracked ribs and a hairline fracture in her left ankle. CT scans ruled out internal bleeding, but showed a mild concussion. The doctors worked. Local authorities arrived to take her statement. Rachel recounted her ordeal as best she could, her voice hoarse and her words occasionally slurred from the pain medication. The officers exchanged skeptical glances as she described the size and ferocity of the bear, but dutifully took notes. "We'll send a team out to investigate," one of the officers assured her. "But you should know, miss, that bear attacks are extremely rare in this area. Are you sure it wasn't a deer or some other large animal?" Rachel felt a flare of indignation through her medicated haze. "I know what I saw," she insisted. "It was a black bear, bigger than any I've ever seen before. It chased me for... I don't know how long. Miles, maybe." The officer nodded non-committally. "All right, Miss Bennett, we'll look into it. For now, you just focus on getting better." As the officers left, Rachel overheard one of them muttering to his partner. "Probably just panicked and took a bad fall. You know how these city folks get in the real wilderness." Anger and frustration welled up in Rachel's chest, but exhaustion quickly overtook her. As the pain medication pulled her towards sleep, her last conscious thought was a determination to make them believe her. She knew what she had experienced, and she wouldn't let anyone dismiss it as mere panic or imagination. Hours later, Rachel awoke to find herself in a private hospital room. The pain in her body had dulled to a persistent ache, and her head felt clearer. Sunlight streamed through the window, suggesting it was late afternoon of the following day. A nurse entered, smiling when she saw Rachel was awake. "Good to see you up, Miss Bennett. How are you feeling?" "Like I went 10 rounds with a grizzly," Rachel croaked, her attempt at humor falling flat even to her own ears. The nurse chuckled sympathetically as she checked Rachel's vitals. "Well, from what I hear, you're not far off. The doctor will be in soon to discuss your injuries and treatment plan. Oh, and you have some visitors waiting, if you feel up to it." Rachel nodded, wincing at the movement. "Yes, please, I'd like to see them." A few minutes later, the door opened to admit Mike, Rachel's riding buddy, and to her surprise, the park ranger she had spoken to before setting out on her ill-fated ride. Mike rushed to her bedside, his face a mask of concern. "Jesus, Rach, you scared the hell out of me. When I got the call that you'd been found on the train tracks, I thought, well, I'm just glad you're okay." Rachel managed a weak smile. "Define okay," she joked, then turned her attention to the ranger. "I'm surprised to see you here." The ranger, whose name tag identified him as Ranger Johnson, stepped forward. "Miss Bennett, I came to apologize. When you set out yesterday, I didn't take the bear warnings as seriously as I should have. If I had, perhaps I could have prevented this." Rachel shook her head, immediately regretting the motion as pain lanced through her skull. "It's not your fault. I'm the one who decided to go deeper into the forest." Ranger Johnson nodded gravely. "Be that as it may, your experience has highlighted a serious issue. We've had increased bear sightings in that area, but nothing like what you described. I'd like to hear your account if you're feeling up to it." For the next hour, Rachel recounted her ordeal in detail. She described the bear's size and behavior, the multiple encounters, and her desperate flight through the forest. Mike and Ranger Johnson listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with each passing minute. When she finished, Ranger Johnson leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "This is concerning, Ms. Bennett. A bear exhibiting this level of aggression and persistence is unusual. We'll need to step up our patrols and possibly consider closing some trails until we can locate and assess this animal." Rachel felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone was taking her seriously. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick, with emotion. "I was afraid no one would believe me." Mike squeezed her hand gently. "We believe you, Rach, and we're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." As Ranger Johnson stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Ms. Bennett, your experience, while traumatic, could help prevent future incidents. Would you be willing to speak with our wildlife management team once you're feeling better? Your first-hand account could be invaluable." Rachel nodded, a sense of purpose cutting through her pain and fatigue. "Absolutely. Anything I can do to help." As the door closed behind Ranger Johnson, Rachel leaned back against her pillows, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. The memory of the bears, eyes so wild and intelligent, flashed through her mind. She knew that the image would stay with her for a long time to come, a reminder of the raw power of nature and her own vulnerability in the face of it. But there was something else there too. A newfound respect for the wilderness and its inhabitants, and a determination to ensure that humans and wildlife could coexist safely. As she drifted off to sleep, Rachel began to think about how she could turn her harrowing experience into something positive, a way to educate others and protect both people and animals in the future. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room cast a sickly pallor over Rachel's bruised face as she fumbled with her phone. Her bandaged fingers trembled slightly, a mix of residual pain and nervous energy making it difficult to type. She'd been trying to reach the park rangers for hours, desperate to share her story and warn others about the danger lurking in Pisgah. "National Forest, come on," she muttered, listening to the ringtone drone on. Finally, a click and a gruff voice answered. "Pisgah Ranger Station. This is Ranger Johnson speaking." Rachel's words tumbled out in a rush. "Ranger Johnson, it's Rachel Bennett. The woman who was attacked by the bear yesterday. I need to talk to you about what happened." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Ranger Johnson spoke again, his tone was cautious. "Ms. Bennett, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but I want you to know that we've had teams out searching the area where you were found. So far, we haven't found any evidence of a bear attack." Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach. "What do you mean, no evidence? What? About my bike? The claw marks on the trees? We found your bike," Ranger Johnson interrupted gently. "It was damaged, yes, but consistent with a bad fall. As for claw marks, bears do leave those, but we haven't found any fresh ones in that area." Frustration welled up in Rachel's chest. "But I know what I saw. That bear was real and it's still out there. Other people could be in danger." "Ms. Bennett," Ranger Johnson's voice was patient but firm. "Black bears are generally shy creatures. Attacks on humans are extremely rare. Are you absolutely certain it wasn't a case of mistaken identity? Perhaps a large deer or—" "It wasn't." "A deer," Rachel snapped, then immediately regretted her outburst. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Look, I know how it sounds, but I'm an experienced rider. I've seen bears before. This was different. It was aggressive, persistent. It chased me for miles." There was another long pause. When Ranger Johnson spoke again, his tone was carefully neutral. "I understand, Ms. Bennett. We're taking your report seriously. We've increased patrols in the area and posted additional warnings, but without concrete evidence, there's only so much we can do." Rachel slumped back against her pillows, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. "So that's it? You're just going to wait until someone else gets hurt?" "That's not what I'm saying," Ranger Johnson replied. "We're monitoring the situation closely, but we also have to balance public safety with the need to protect wildlife and maintain access to the forest. False alarms can be just as dangerous as real threats." As the conversation wound down, Rachel felt a mix of emotions churning inside her. Anger at not being fully believed, fear for others who might encounter the bear, and a gnawing doubt that maybe, just maybe, her memory of the event wasn't as clear as she thought. After hanging up, Rachel stared at her phone's screen, her finger hovering over the social media app icon. She had an urge to share her story, to warn everyone she could about the danger in Pisgah, but something held her back. What if Ranger Johnson was right? What if she posted her story and it turned out to be exaggerated or somehow mistaken? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A nurse entered, carrying a tray with Rachel's medications. "How are we feeling today, Ms. Bennett?" the nurse asked cheerfully, setting the tray down. Rachel managed a weak smile. "About as good as you'd expect for someone who fell off a mountain." "The way?" Nurse nodded sympathetically as she checked Rachel's vitals. "I heard about your ordeal. Must have been terrifying being lost in the woods like that." Rachel's brow furrowed. "Lost? I wasn't lost. I was being chased by a—" "Oh, of course," the nurse interrupted, her tone placating. "I'm sure it felt very real at the time. Trauma can do funny things to our perceptions." Rachel opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. What was the point? The nurse clearly didn't believe her either. As the nurse left, Rachel's gaze drifted to the window. The hospital was on the outskirts of Asheville, and she could see the dark line of the forest on the horizon. Somewhere out there, the bear was still roaming free. She was sure of it. But how could she convince others when she had no proof beyond her own battered body? Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mike, her riding buddy. "Hey, Rach. How are you holding up? Local news. Wants to do a piece on trail safety. Thought you might want to share your story. Let me know if you're interested." Rachel stared at the message for a long moment. Here was a chance to get her story out there, to warn others about the danger she'd faced. But doubt gnawed at her. What if she went public and it turned out she was wrong? She'd be humiliated, possibly even sued for causing panic. With a sigh, Rachel typed out a reply. "Thanks, Mike, but I think I'll pass for now. Still trying to process everything." She hit send, then tossed her phone aside. Frustration and helplessness washed over her. She knew what she had experienced. The terror, the pain, the primal fear as the bear charged. It had all been real. But without evidence, without someone to corroborate her story, it was her word, against the skepticism of others. As the day wore on, Rachel found herself replaying the attack in her mind over and over. Each time she scrutinized her memories, looking for any detail she might have missed, any piece of evidence she could use to prove her story. But the more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. Had the bear really been as large as she remembered? Had it chased her for as long as she thought, or had fear and adrenaline warped her sense of time? A light rap on the doorframe drew her attention. Dr. Patel, the psychologist assigned to her case, stood in the doorway. "Ms. Bennett? Do you mind if I come in?" Rachel nodded, steeling herself for another round of disbelief. Dr. Patel took a seat beside the bed, her expression kind but neutral. "I've been reviewing your case and I wanted to talk to you about your experience in the forest." "Let me guess," Rachel said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "You want to tell me it was all in my head? That I imagined the whole thing?" Dr. Patel shook her head. "Not at all. I'm here to listen, Rachel. Your experience was real to you, and that's what matters right now." Something in the doctor's tone made Rachel pause. For the first time since the attack, she felt like someone was truly willing to hear her out. I know how it sounds," Rachel began hesitantly. "A giant, aggressive bear that no one else has seen. No real evidence except my injuries. But I swear it happened. I can still see its eyes, still feel the ground shaking as it charged." Dr. Patel nodded encouragingly. "It's not uncommon for traumatic experiences to be vivid and intense in our memories, whether or not the details are exactly as you remember. The fear and pain you felt were very real." As Rachel recounted her story once more, she found herself focusing on different aspects. The feeling of helplessness as she realized she was in over her head. The surge of adrenaline that kept her going when she thought all was lost. The moment of connection when she looked into the bear's eyes and saw not just a mindless beast, but a thinking, feeling creature. When she finished, Dr. Patel leaned forward slightly. "Rachel, regardless of what exactly happened out there, you survived an incredibly harrowing experience. It's natural to want others to understand and validate what you went through, but healing doesn't depend on others believing every detail. It starts with you acknowledging your own strength and resilience." Rachel felt something shift inside her. The desperate need to prove her story to others began to loosen its grip. "So what do I do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You focus on healing," Dr. Patel replied, "both physically and emotionally, and perhaps in time you can find a way to use this experience to help others, even if it's not in the way you initially thought." As Dr. Patel left, Rachel turned her gaze back to the window. The forest on the horizon no longer seemed as menacing. It was still wild, still potentially dangerous, but it was also a place of beauty and life. Her encounter, whatever its exact nature, had changed her, and maybe, just maybe, that change could be for the better. With a deep breath, Rachel picked up her phone again. She opened her social media app, but instead of posting about the attack, she typed out a different message. "Survived a harrowing experience in Pisgah National Forest. Grateful to be alive and healing. Reminder to all, nature is beautiful but demands respect. Stay safe out there, friends." As she hit post, Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her story might not be believed by everyone, but her experience was real, and in sharing a message of caution and respect for nature, she found a way to make her voice heard that felt true to herself. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor flickered as Rachel slowly made her way down the hall, her steps cautious and measured. It had been 3 days since her harrowing encounter in Pisgah National Forest, and the doctors had finally cleared her for short walks. Her body ached with each movement, a constant reminder of her ordeal. As she rounded a corner, Rachel caught sight of her reflection in a window. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger, pale with dark circles under her eyes and a series of angry scratches across her cheek. She touched the marks gingerly, wincing at the tenderness. "Miss Bennet?" a voice called from behind. Her. Rachel turned to see a young man in a pressed suit, a press badge hanging from his neck. "I'm Jack Harper from the Asheville Citizen-Times. Do you have a moment to talk about your experience in Pisgah?" Rachel's heart rate quickened. This was the moment she'd been both anticipating and dreading, a chance to share her story, to warn others about the danger lurking in the forest. But the memory of the skepticism she'd faced from the rangers and hospital staff made her hesitate. I'm not sure that's a good idea," she said, her voice wavering slightly. Jack's expression softened. "I understand your hesitation, Miss Bennet, but your story could help raise awareness about wildlife safety. People need to know what happened to you." Rachel considered his words. Maybe this was her chance to make a difference, to ensure that no one else would have to go through what she did. She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, but can we sit down? I'm still not quite steady on my feet." They made their way to a small waiting area, Rachel easing herself gingerly into a chair. Jack pulled out a recorder and notepad, his pen poised expectantly. "Why don't you start at the beginning?" he prompted gently. "What brought you to Pisgah that day?" Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the memories to surface. "I'm an avid mountain biker," she began. "I'd heard about a new trail in Pisgah and wanted to check it out. I've ridden those forests dozens of times, but this was different." As she recounted her story, Rachel found herself reliving every terrifying moment. The initial encounter with the bear, the desperate flight through the forest, the final confrontation that left her battered and clinging to life on the train tracks. Jack listened intently, his pen scratching across the notepad. "It was massive," Rachel emphasized, her hands gesturing to indicate the bear's size. "Bigger than any black bear I've ever seen. And its eyes, there was an intelligence there, a purpose. It wasn't just acting on instinct. It was hunting me." Jack's brow furrowed. The park rangers reported that they found no evidence of a bear attack. "How do you respond to that?" Rachel felt a flare of frustration. "I know what I saw, what I experienced. Just because they didn't find tracks or claw marks doesn't mean it didn't happen. I have the injuries to prove it. And yet, some have suggested that your injuries could be explained by a bad fall from your bike." Jack pressed gently. Rachel's jaw clenched. "Her fall didn't chase me for miles. A fall didn't corner me on that cliff. I know the difference between an accident and a deliberate attack." Jack nodded, jotting down a few more notes. "Ms. Bennet, bear attacks are extremely rare in this area. Some experts have suggested that stress or fear might have caused you to misinterpret what you saw. Is it possible that—" "No," Rachel interrupted firmly. "I'm an experienced outdoors woman. I've encountered wildlife before. This was different. This bear was aggressive, persistent. It wasn't normal behavior." As the interview continued, Rachel could sense Jack's skepticism growing. She felt a knot forming in her stomach. This wasn't going the way she'd hoped. Instead of raising awareness, she was coming across as unstable, perhaps even unreliable. "One last question, Ms. Bennet," Jack said, his tone careful. "Given the lack of corroborating evidence, what would you say to those who might doubt your story?" Rachel paused, considering her words carefully. "I would say, I understand their skepticism. I know how incredible it sounds, but I also know what I experienced. Whether people believe every detail or not, the message remains the same. Nature deserves our respect and caution. We're visitors in these wild places, and we need to be prepared for anything." Jack clicked off his recorder and closed his notebook. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Bennet. We'll be running the story in tomorrow's edition." As he walked away, Rachel slumped in her chair, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. She'd told her story, but would it make a difference? Or had she just opened herself up to more doubt and ridicule? Later that evening, As Rachel scrolled through her phone in her hospital room, she came across a local news website. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the headline, "Mountain Biker Claims Bear Attack in Pisgah. Fact or Fiction?" With trembling fingers, she tapped on the article. As she read, her heart sank. While the piece included her account of the events, it was peppered with quotes from wildlife experts and park officials casting doubt on her story. Words like unlikely, no evidence, and possible misinterpretation jumped out at her. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. She'd hoped that sharing her story would help others, would lead to increased safety measures in the forest. Instead, it seemed she'd only managed to paint herself as a hysterical woman who couldn't tell the difference between a bear and her own shadow. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mike, her riding buddy, poked his head in. "Hey, Rach, saw the article, you okay?" Rachel wiped at her eyes hastily. "Yeah, I'm fine, just not quite the response I was hoping for." Mike entered the room, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "People are talking about it, though. That's something, right?" "Sure, they're talking about how I'm either a liar or crazy," Rachel said bitterly. Mike reached out, gently squeezing her hand. "Hey, don't let it get to you. You know what happened out there. And even if people don't believe every detail, your story is making them think twice about safety in the backcountry. That's a win in my book." Rachel managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Mike. I keep second-guessing myself. What if they're right? What if I did imagine some of it? Does it matter?" Mike asked softly. "You survived something traumatic. The details might be fuzzy, but the lesson is clear. We need to respect nature and be prepared for anything when we're out there." As Mike's words sank in, Rachel felt some of the tension leave her body. He was right. Whether people believed in her giant, aggressive bear or not, the message of caution and respect for the wilderness was getting through. She picked up her phone again, opening her social media app. With a deep breath, she began to type. "To everyone who's reached out about my experience in Pisgah, thank you. Whether you believe every detail or not, please remember to stay safe out there. Nature is beautiful, but it can also be dangerous. Be prepared, be respectful, and never take your safety for granted." As she hit post, Rachel felt a small sense of accomplishment. She might not be able to convince everyone of what she'd seen, but if her story made even one person more cautious and prepared in the wilderness, then sharing it had been worth it. The memory of the bear's eyes, wild and intelligent, flashed through her mind. Rachel knew that she would carry that image with her for the rest of her life. But now, instead of feeling like a burden, it felt like a reminder of her own strength and of the raw, untamed power of the natural world. The cool mountain air nipped at Rachel's cheeks as she stood at the trailhead of Pisgah National Forest. It had been 3 months since her harrowing encounter with the bear, and this was her first time back. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and damp earth, trying to quell the anxiety bubbling in her chest. Mike stood beside her, his hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder. "You sure you're ready for this, Rach?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Rachel nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I have to do this, Mike. I can't let fear keep me away from something I love." She glanced down at her new mountain bike, a gift from her local riding community who had rallied around her after the incident. The sight of it brought a mix of emotions. Gratitude for the support, but also a pang of loss for her old bike, left mangled somewhere in the depths of the forest. As they began to ride, Rachel felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the joy of navigating the twists and turns of the trail. But there was something else too, a hyper-awareness of her surroundings, her eyes constantly scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. They had been riding for about an hour when they came across a group of hikers heading in the opposite direction. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a walking stick, did a double-take as she recognized Rachel. "Wait, aren't you the woman from the news? The one who claimed she was attacked by a giant bear?" the woman asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Rachel felt her cheeks flush. In the months since the incident, she had become something of a local celebrity, or depending on who you asked, a local crackpot. Her story had sparked heated debates about wildlife management and trail safety, but it had also made her the target of ridicule from those who doubted her account. That's me, Rachel replied, forcing a smile. Rachel Bennett. The woman's hiking companion, a tall man with a graying beard, chimed in. I gotta say, that was some story. But you know, I've been hiking these trails for 30 years, and I've never seen a bear act the way you described. Rachel felt a familiar frustration rising. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Mike spoke up first. Whether you believe every detail or not, he said firmly, Rachel's experience has made a lot of people think twice about trail safety, and that's a good thing for everyone who uses this forest. The hikers nodded, looking slightly abashed. As they moved on, the woman called back over her shoulder, Well, stay safe out there. Rachel and Mike continued their ride in silence for a while. As they approached a fork in the trail, Rachel suddenly pulled to a stop. This is it, she said quietly. This is where I first saw the bear. Mike dismounted, standing beside her. Do you want to turn back? Rachel shook her head. No, I need to do this. I need to reclaim this place. They pushed on, the trail growing more challenging. Rachel felt her heart rate increase, and not just from the exertion. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every rustle in the undergrowth made her flinch. As they rounded a bend, Rachel's breath caught in her throat. There, just off the trail, was a large, dark shape. For a moment, panic overwhelmed her, but as her eyes adjusted, she realized it was just a fallen log, its bark stripped away to reveal the dark wood beneath. Rachel let out a shaky laugh. God! I'm jumping at shadows. Mike gave her an encouraging smile. It's okay, Rach. It's normal to be on edge. You've been through a lot. They paused for a water break, and Rachel found herself staring into the depths of the forest. The fear was still there, but it was different now, a healthy respect for the wilderness rather than blind terror. You know, she said thoughtfully, even if people don't believe me about the bear, I think going through all this has changed me. I see the forest differently now. It's not just a playground, it's a living, breathing ecosystem. We're guests here and we need to act like it. Mike nodded. That's a perspective more people could stand to have. As they prepared to move on, a park ranger appeared on the trail. Rachel recognized him as Ranger Johnson, the one she had spoken to in the hospital. Miss Bennett, he said, tipping his hat. Good to see you back on the trails. Rachel tensed, expecting another round of skepticism, but to her surprise, Ranger Johnson's expression was earnest. I owe you an apology, he continued. We may not have found evidence of your bear, but your story got people talking. We've seen a significant increase in hikers and bikers taking safety precautions, carrying bear spray, making noise on the trails. Whatever happened out here, you've made a difference. Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Thank you, she said softly. That means a lot. As they parted ways with the ranger and continued their ride, Rachel felt a shift within herself. The forest, which had become a place of fear and doubt, was transforming back into a source of joy and wonder. But it was a mature joy now, tempered with respect and caution. They reached the end of the trail as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. Rachel paused, taking in the view of the mountains stretching out before them. You did it, Rach, Mike said, pride evident in his voice. You faced your fears. Rachel nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over her. Yeah, I guess I did. As they loaded their bikes onto the car, Rachel took one last look at the forest. In the fading light, she could almost imagine she saw a large, dark shape moving among the trees. But this time the sight didn't fill her with terror. Instead, she felt a strange sense of connection to the wilderness and all its inhabitants, both seen and unseen. Ready to head home? Mike asked, closing the trunk. Rachel smiled, a genuine full smile that reached her eyes. Yeah, I'm ready. But let's plan our next ride. I think I'm finally ready to explore some new trails. As they drove away from Pisgah National Forest, Rachel felt at peace. Her encounter with the bear, whether others believed it or not, had changed her. It had shown her the power and beauty of nature, the importance of respect and preparedness, and most importantly, her own resilience. The memory of those wild, intelligent eyes would stay with her forever. But now, instead of a source of nightmares, it was a reminder of the raw, untamed spirit of the wilderness, a spirit she was now more determined than ever to protect and cherish. Now let's go to the next attack case. If you're enjoying it, leave a like and a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Let's move on to the next one. Lisa Harper's excitement grew with each passing mile as she drove her weathered Subaru Outback along the winding roads leading to Grand Teton National Park. The majestic peaks loomed larger on the horizon, their snow-capped summits piercing the azure sky. At 37, Lisa had spent the better part of her adult life chasing the perfect shot, and she had a feeling this trip might just yield it. As she approached the park entrance, Lisa rolled down her window, letting the crisp mountain air fill her lungs. The scent of pine and wildflowers tickled her nose, a welcome change from the city air she'd left behind in Denver. "Good morning, ma'am," the park ranger greeted her at the entrance station. "Welcome to Grand Teton National Park. Do you have a reservation?" Lisa smiled, handing over her documentation. "Yes, I do. I'm Lisa Harper, staying at the Jenny Lake campground for the next few days." The ranger nodded, checking her paperwork. "Ah, I see you're a photographer. Here for the wildlife?" "That's right," Lisa replied, her eyes sparkling with anticipation, hoping to catch some shots of the local residents, preferably from a safe distance. The ranger chuckled. "Well, you've come to the right place. Just remember, we share this land with some pretty impressive creatures. Always be aware of your surroundings, especially when you're focused through that camera lens." Lisa nodded solemnly. "Of course. I've done my research and attended a few wilderness safety courses. I know the drill. Make noise, carry bear spray, and give the animals their space." "Good to hear," the ranger said, handing back her papers. "Enjoy your stay, Ms. Harper, and don't hesitate to stop by the visitor center if you need any information or assistance." As Lisa drove through the entrance, the grandeur of the landscape took her breath away. The Teton Range stretched before her, a jagged silhouette against the cloudless sky. She couldn't resist pulling over at the first viewpoint, grabbing her camera from the passenger seat. Click, click, click. The familiar sound of the shutter was music to her ears as she captured the panoramic vista. But these shots were just warm-ups. The real prizes awaited deeper in the park. Following the signs to Jenny Lake Campground, Lisa's mind raced with possibilities. Moose wading in shallow waters, elk grazing in meadows, maybe even a glimpse of the elusive mountain lions that roamed these parts. And, of course, there were the bears. Both black and grizzly called this park home. The thought of encountering a bear sent a small shiver down her spine. Lisa had photographed black bears before in other parks, always from the safety of her car or a designated viewing area. But grizzlies, they were in a league of their own, majestic, powerful, and undeniably dangerous. As she pulled into the campground, Lisa pushed those thoughts aside. She was here to capture the beauty of nature, not dwell on its potential dangers. Besides, she was prepared. Her bear spray canister hung in its holster on her hip, a constant reminder of the wilderness's untamed nature. Lisa found her assigned campsite, a cozy spot nestled among towering pines with a partial view of the lake. She went about setting up her tent with practiced efficiency, her muscles remembering the motions despite the months since her last camping trip. As she hammered the last stake into the ground, a friendly voice called out from the neighboring site. "Hello there. Looks like we're going to be neighbors for a few days." Lisa straightened up, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. A couple in their early 60s stood at the edge of her campsite, warm smiles on their weathered faces. "Hi," Lisa replied, returning their smile. "I'm Lisa. Nice to meet you." "Frank and Martha," the man said, gesturing to himself and his wife. "We couldn't help but notice all your camera gear. You must be quite the photographer." Lisa laughed, glancing at the cases of equipment still piled in her car. "I like to think so. Nature photography is my passion, and my job, actually. I'm here hoping to get some shots for a wildlife magazine." Martha's eyes lit up. "Oh, how exciting! Have you been to the Tetons before?" Lisa shook her head. "First time, actually. I've always wanted to come, but something always seemed to get in the way. Work, family obligations, you name it. But when this assignment came up, I jumped at the chance." Frank nodded knowingly. "Well, you've picked a great time to visit. The wildflowers are in bloom and the animals are active. Just yesterday we saw a mother moose and her calf down by the lake." Lisa's fingers itched for her camera at the mere mention of such a sighting. "That sounds amazing. I'm hoping to get an early start tomorrow, maybe catch the sunrise over the mountains and see what wildlife is out and about." "Just be careful out there," Martha cautioned, her expression turning serious. "We ran into a park ranger yesterday who mentioned there had been some increased bear activity in the area. Apparently a hiker spotted a grizzly not far from here just last week." Lisa felt a mix of excitement and apprehension at this news. Grizzly sighting could make for an incredible photo opportunity, but it also meant she'd need to be extra vigilant. "Thanks for the heads up," Lisa said, patting the bear spray on her hip. "I'll be sure to stay alert and keep my distance if I spot any wildlife." As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the campground, Lisa bid goodnight to her new acquaintances and retreated to her tent. She spent the evening reviewing her equipment, charging batteries and studying her park map, marking potential locations for tomorrow's shoot. Before turning in for the night, Lisa stepped out of her tent one last time. The sky had transformed into a canvas of deep purples and oranges, the last light of day painting the snowy peaks in warm hues. The surface of Jenny Lake mirrored the spectacle, creating a double vision of beauty that took Lisa's breath away. That moment, surrounded by the quiet majesty of the Tetons, Lisa felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. This was why she had become a photographer, to capture and share these fleeting moments of natural wonder. As she zipped up her sleeping bag, Lisa's mind buzzed with anticipation for the day ahead. Little did she know that her upcoming encounter with the wild would test her skills, her courage, and her very survival instincts in ways she could never have imagined. The gentle lapping of water against the shore and the distant call of a loon lulled Lisa into a deep sleep, her dreams filled with visions of the perfect shot that awaited her in the morning light. The first hints of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky when Lisa's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she lay still in her sleeping bag, listening to the gentle chorus of birdsong outside her tent. Then, with a surge of excitement, she remembered where she was and what lay ahead. Lisa unzipped her tent, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The campground was still quiet, most of its occupants still nestled in their sleeping bags. She took a deep breath, savoring the scent of pine and damp earth. The surface of Jenny Lake was like glass, perfectly reflecting the looming silhouettes of the Teton Range. "Perfect conditions," Lisa murmured to herself, reaching for her camera bag. She worked quickly and quietly, not wanting to disturb her sleeping neighbors. Lisa double-checked her gear, camera body, an array of lenses, extra batteries, memory, cards, and of course her trusty bear spray. She slung her heavy backpack over her shoulders, adjusted her hat, and set off towards the lakeshore. As she walked, Lisa kept her eyes and ears open, alert for any signs of wildlife. The park was coming to life around her. A pair of Clark's nutcrackers flitted between tree branches, their harsh calls echoing in the still morning air. In the distance, she heard the distinctive bugle of an elk. Lisa paused at the edge of the lake, raising her camera to capture the first rays of sunlight kissing the mountain peaks. The click of her shutter broke the silence, and she smiled at the LCD screen. It was a good start, but she was after something more dynamic. She continued along the shoreline, following a well-worn trail that led into a more secluded area. The path wound through stands of lodgepole pines and across small gurgling streams. Every so often, Lisa would stop to photograph interesting flora or the occasional small animal, a curious marmot or a darting ground squirrel. After about an hour of hiking, Lisa came upon a small clearing near the water's edge. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. There, not 50 yards away, stood a massive bull moose, its impressive antlers silhouetted against the sparkling surface of the lake. With practiced calm, Lisa slowly unslung her camera bag and extracted her telephoto lens. Her hands trembled, slightly with excitement as she attached it to her camera body. The moose hadn't noticed her yet, too busy grazing on the lush vegetation at the water's edge. Carefully, Lisa raised her camera to her eye. Through the viewfinder, she could see every detail of the majestic animal, the rough texture of its antlers, the coarse brown fur, the droplets of water clinging to its muzzle as it lifted its head from the lake. Click, click, click. Lisa's finger danced on the shutter button, capturing a series of shots as the moose moved. She adjusted her position slightly, trying to frame the animal against the backdrop of the mountains. Suddenly, the moose's head snapped up, its ears swiveling. Lisa held her breath, wondering if she had made too much noise, but the animal's gaze was fixed on something in the distance, beyond where Lisa could see. With surprising grace for such a large creature, the moose turned and loped into the forest, disappearing among the trees. Lisa lowered her camera, her heart pounding with exhilaration. She quickly reviewed the images on her LCD screen, a wide grin spreading across her face. They were perfect, exactly the kind of shots she had come here hoping to get. But the day was still young, and Lisa wasn't ready to head back to camp just yet. She decided to press on, following a narrow game trail that led deeper into the forest. The canopy grew thicker here, dappling the forest floor with patterns of light and shadow. As she walked, Lisa's mind wandered to the bear activity Martha had mentioned the previous evening. She found herself scanning the trees more frequently, one hand resting near her bear spray. The forest seemed to grow quieter, the birdsong fading away. Just as Lisa was considering turning back, she spotted movement ahead. Her heart raced as she raised her camera, expecting perhaps to see a deer or another moose, but as she peered through the viewfinder, her breath caught in her throat. There, in a small clearing about 100 yards away, was a grizzly bear. The massive animal was on all fours, its shaggy brown fur gleaming in the patches of sunlight that broke through the canopy. It seemed to be digging, probably foraging for grubs or roots. Lisa's first instinct was to retreat quietly, to give the bear its space. But the photographer in her couldn't resist. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. With trembling hands, she adjusted her camera settings, grateful for the powerful zoom of her telephoto lens. Click, click, click. She took several shots in rapid succession, her excitement growing with each one. The bear was magnificent. It's powerful, muscles rippling beneath its fur as it moved. Lisa found herself entranced, forgetting for a moment the potential danger of the situation. Suddenly, a twig snapped beneath her foot. The sound, though small, seemed to echo in the quiet forest. Lisa froze, her heart pounding in her ears. The bear's head snapped up, its small eyes scanning the forest. For a terrifying moment, its gaze seemed to lock directly on Lisa's position. She held her breath, not daring to move a muscle. After what felt like an eternity, the bear lowered its head and resumed its foraging. Lisa let out a shaky breath, realizing she had been holding it. Slowly, carefully, she began to back away, keeping her eyes on the bear. Once she felt she was at a safe distance, Lisa turned and began to make her way quickly but quietly back towards the main trail. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to stop and take several deep breaths to calm herself. When she finally emerged from the forest near Jenny Lake, the sun was high in the sky. The campground was bustling with activity now, families preparing for hikes and picnics. The normalcy of the scene was jarring after her intense experience in the forest. As Lisa approached her campsite, she saw Frank and Martha sitting outside their tent, enjoying a late breakfast. "Good morning, Lisa," Martha called out cheerfully. "You're out and about early. Any luck with the wildlife?" Lisa managed a smile, still feeling a bit shaken. "You could say that," she replied. "I got some great shots of a moose down by the lake." Frank leaned forward, interested. "Is that so? Wonderful. Anything else exciting?" Lisa hesitated for a moment, debating whether to mention the bear. She didn't want to alarm them unnecessarily. But she also felt they should be aware of the potential danger. "Actually," she said slowly, "I did see a grizzly bear pretty far off, but still think it was quite an experience." Martha's eyes widened. "Oh my, were you scared?" Lisa nodded. "A little, yeah. But I kept my distance and it didn't seem to notice. For me, still, I think I'll stick to more populated areas for the rest of my stay." Frank nodded approvingly. "That's wise. It's easy to forget we're in their territory, not the other way around." As Lisa excused herself to review her photos and rest, she couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with the bear wasn't over. Little did she know, her most harrowing experience in Grand Teton National Park was yet to come. The following afternoon, Lisa found herself drawn back to the secluded area near Jenny Lake, where she had spotted the moose. The memory of yesterday's bear sighting had left her slightly on edge, but the allure of capturing more stunning wildlife shots was too strong to resist. This time, she made sure to leave a note at her campsite detailing her planned route, just in case. As she hiked along the now familiar trail, Lisa's senses were on high alert. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made her pause, her hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on her hip. But as the hours passed uneventfully, she began to relax, losing herself in the beauty of her surroundings. The clearing where she had seen the moose was bathed in warm afternoon light when Lisa arrived. She set up her tripod, attaching her camera and favorite telephoto lens. Through the viewfinder, she scanned the edge of the lake, hoping to catch a glimpse of some interesting wildlife. A movement in the distance caught her eye. Lisa's heart quickened as she spotted a large animal emerging from the tree line. But it wasn't the moose she had been hoping for. Instead, a massive grizzly bear lumbered into view, its shaggy fur gleaming in the sunlight. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Was this the same bear she had seen yesterday? It was hard to tell from this distance, but the animal seemed even larger than she remembered. Despite her fear, the photographer in her couldn't resist the opportunity. She adjusted her camera settings with trembling hands, zooming in as much as her lens would allow. Through the viewfinder, she could make out the bear's powerful muscles rippling beneath its fur as it moved along the shoreline. Click, click, click. Lisa's finger pressed the shutter button repeatedly, capturing a series of shots. She was so focused on getting the perfect image that she didn't immediately notice the change in the bear's behavior. It was only when she lowered her camera to check the LCD screen that Lisa realized something was wrong. The bear had stopped moving and was now standing on its hind legs, its nose raised to the air. With a jolt of terror, Lisa realized it was sniffing in her direction. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Lisa's mind raced through everything she had learned about bear encounters. Don't run. Make yourself look big. Speak calmly but firmly. But before she could act on any of this advice, the bear dropped to all fours and began to charge directly towards her. Oh God, Lisa muttered, her body frozen in panic. The bear's speed was incredible, eating up the distance between them with frightening rapidity. Lisa knew she had only seconds to act. With shaking hands, she reached for her bear spray, fumbling with the safety cap. The bear was now less than 50 yards away, its powerful legs propelling it forward with terrifying force. Lisa could hear its heavy breathing, see the determination in its small dark eyes. Finally, her fingers closed around the bear spray canister. She raised it just as the bear closed the final few yards between them. Time seemed to slow down as Lisa depressed the trigger, sending a cloud of capsaicin spray into the air. The effect was almost immediate. The bear reared up on its hind legs, roaring in pain and confusion. It shook its massive head, pawing at its eyes and nose. Lisa used this moment of distraction to back away slowly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. But in her haste to retreat, Lisa's foot caught on a tree root. She stumbled backward, losing her balance and falling hard onto her back. The impact knocked the wind out of her lungs and sent her camera equipment scattering across the forest floor. Through tear-filled eyes, Lisa saw the bear recovering from the effects of the spray. It shook its head once more, then fixed its gaze on her prone form. With another ear-splitting roar, it charged again. Lisa scrambled backward, her hands scrabbling, in the dirt for anything she could use to defend herself. Her fingers closed around a sturdy branch, and she swung it wildly in front of her as the bear approached. The branch connected with the bear's snout, causing it to recoil momentarily. But this only seemed to enrage it further. With a swipe of its massive paw, the bear knocked the branch from Lisa's grasp, sending it flying into the underbrush. In that moment, Lisa was certain she was going to die. She closed her eyes, bracing for the bear's attack, but instead of feeling claws and teeth, she heard a deafening crack echo through the clearing. Lisa's eyes flew open to see the bear stumbling backward, looking dazed. A large rock lay on the ground nearby, and standing at the edge of the clearing was a man in a park ranger uniform, his arm still raised from throwing the stone. "Hey!" the ranger shouted, his voice firm and authoritative. "Get out of here!" The bear hesitated, swaying slightly on its feet. The ranger used this moment to move closer to Lisa, placing himself between her and the animal. He raised his arms, making himself look as large as possible, and began to shout and clap his hands. Confused and still suffering from the effects of the bear spray, the grizzly finally turned and lumbered back into the forest, disappearing among the trees. Lisa lay on the ground, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear. The ranger knelt beside her, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, helping her to sit up. "Are you injured?" Lisa took a shuddering breath, trying to calm her racing heart. I think so," she managed to say. "Just some scrapes and bruises, I think." The ranger nodded, relief evident on his face. "You're lucky. That was a close call. Can you tell me what happened?" As Lisa recounted the events leading up to the bear's charge, the ranger listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each word. "For you did well with the bear spray," he said when she finished, "but you should never have been this far out alone, especially after spotting a bear in the area yesterday." Lisa nodded, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and lingering fear. I got caught up in trying to get the perfect shot. I wasn't thinking clearly." The ranger helped Lisa to her feet, then began gathering her scattered camera equipment. Most of it was intact, but her favorite lens had a large crack running across the glass. "I'm going to escort you back to the main campground," the ranger said, handing Lisa her damaged camera. "We'll need to file a report about this incident, and I want to have one of our medics check you over, just in case." As they began the trek back, Lisa couldn't help but cast nervous glances over her shoulder. The forest, which had seemed so beautiful and inviting just hours ago, now felt oppressive and dangerous. Will the bear come back?" she asked, her voice small. The ranger shook his head. "It's unlikely. The spray and the scare we gave it should keep it away from this area for a while. But we'll put out warnings to other campers just to be safe." Lisa nodded, clutching her broken camera to her chest. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. She had come face to face with one of nature's most powerful predators and lived to tell the tale. But as they emerged from the forest and the campground came into view, Lisa knew that this experience would stay with her forever. The majestic beauty of the wilderness now held a new, more dangerous edge in her mind, and she knew that her approach to wildlife photography would never be the same again. The world around Lisa seemed to move in slow motion as the grizzly bear closed the final few yards between them. The thunderous sound of its paws striking the earth reverberated through her body, momentarily drowning out the frantic beating of her own heart. In those fleeting seconds, Lisa's mind raced through a kaleidoscope of memories, her childhood, her family, her passion for photography that had led her to this moment. She realized with a stark clarity that only mortal danger can bring that she wasn't ready for this to be the end. As the bear's massive form loomed over her, Lisa's survival instincts finally kicked in. She attempted to roll to the side, hoping to avoid the full brunt of the attack. But the bear's reactions were lightning fast, defying its enormous size. A powerful paw swiped through the air, connecting with Lisa's shoulder and sending her sprawling across the forest floor. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, leaving her gasping for air. Pain exploded across her back as she collided with the unforgiving ground. Through the haze of shock and fear, Lisa was dimly aware of a sickening crack, the sound of her beloved camera shattering against a nearby rock. Disoriented and struggling to breathe, Lisa tried to push herself up, but the bear was upon her again, in an instant. Its hot, rancid breath washed over her face as it loomed above, jaws open in a terrifying snarl. Lisa raised her arms instinctively, a futile attempt to protect herself from the impending attack. The bear's teeth sank into her forearm, eliciting a scream of agony from Lisa. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, white-hot and all-consuming. She could feel the bones in her arm grinding together as the bear shook its massive head, treating her limb like a rag doll. "Help!" Lisa screamed, her voice raw and desperate. "Somebody help me!" But there was no one to hear her cries. She was alone in the wilderness, at the mercy of one of nature's most fearsome predators. In a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, Lisa managed to wrench her arm free from the bear's jaws. Blood flowed freely from the deep puncture wounds, staining the forest floor beneath her. The coppery scent seemed to further enrage the bear, its small eyes gleaming with primal fury. Lisa scrambled backward, her good arm clawing at the earth, in a desperate attempt to put distance between herself and the bear, but her efforts were in vain. The grizzly advanced, its massive paws leaving deep imprints in the soft soil. As the bear reared up on its hind legs, preparing to deliver another crushing blow, Lisa's hand brushed against something hard and metallic. Her bear spray. In the chaos of the attack, it had become dislodged from its holster. With trembling fingers, Lisa grasped the canister. She knew she only had one chance to get this right. As the bear's paw descended towards her, Lisa raised the spray and depressed the trigger, aiming for the animal's face. A cloud of orange mist erupted from the canister, enveloping the bear's head. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The grizzly let out a roar of pain and confusion, stumbling backward. It shook its massive head violently, pawing at its eyes and snout in an attempt to rid itself of the burning sensation. Lisa used this moment of reprieve to drag herself away, every movement sending waves of agony through her battered body. She could feel warm blood seeping through her torn clothing, evidence of the bear's savage attack. As she pulled herself to her feet, swaying unsteadily, Lisa caught sight of her ruined camera. The expensive piece of equipment lay in pieces, the ETA lens shattered, and the body cracked open like an egg. Under normal circumstances, the loss would have been devastating. Now it seemed inconsequential compared to the fight for her very survival. The bear, still reeling from the effects of the spray, had retreated a short distance. But Lisa knew she couldn't count on it staying away for long. She needed to get out of there, to find help before the grizzly recovered, or her injuries overwhelmed her. With one last glance at her destroyed camera, Lisa turned and began to stumble through the forest. Each step was a battle against pain and fatigue. Her vision swam, the trees around her seeming to sway and ripple like a mirage in the desert. "Keep moving," Lisa muttered to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Just keep moving. She had no idea which direction would lead her back to the campground or to help. In her panic and disorientation, all sense of direction had abandoned her. Lisa could only push forward, driven by the primal need to survive. As she staggered through the underbrush, Lisa's mind replayed the attack in vivid, terrifying detail. The bear's roar, the searing pain of its claws and teeth, the horrifying realization that she might not make it out alive. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the blood and dirt that caked her skin. Time lost all meaning as Lisa pushed on. Minutes or hours could have passed. She had no way of knowing. The forest around her began to darken, whether from the approach of evening or her own fading consciousness, she couldn't tell. Just as Lisa felt her strength beginning to give out, she heard a sound that made her heart leap. Voices. Human voices carried on the wind from somewhere ahead. "Help!" Lisa tried to shout, but her voice came out as little more than a hoarse whisper. She stumbled towards the sound, her remaining energy propelling her forward. Suddenly, the trees thinned and Lisa found herself on the edge of a clearing. Through blurry vision, she could make out the shapes of tents and people moving about, the campground. Somehow, miraculously, she had made it back. "Help!" Lisa managed to croak out, louder this time. "Please, help me." Heads turned in her direction, and Lisa saw looks of shock and horror dawning on the faces of the campers. Then, mercifully, everything went black as Lisa collapsed to the ground, her battered body finally giving in to exhaustion and trauma. The next thing Lisa was aware of was the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. She opened her eyes slowly, wincing at the bright fluorescent lights above her. "Miss Harper, can you hear me?" A gentle voice broke through the fog in her mind. Lisa turned her head slightly to see a nurse standing beside her bed, a concerned look on her face. What happened?" Lisa managed to ask, her throat dry and sore. "You're in the hospital in Jackson," the nurse explained softly. "You were attacked by a bear in Grand Teton National Park, do you remember?" The memories came flooding back, bringing with them a wave of fear and pain. Lisa nodded weakly, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're very lucky to be alive," the nurse continued, checking Lisa's vital signs. "The doctors had to perform surgery to repair some internal injuries, and you've lost a lot of blood. But you're going to be okay." As the nurse spoke, Lisa became aware of the extent of her injuries. Her left arm was heavily bandaged and immobilized, likely hiding a multitude of stitches beneath. She could feel a tight binding around her ribs, and various other parts of her body throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. "My camera," Lisa said suddenly, the memory of her shattered equipment resurfacing. "It's ruined." The nurse patted her hand gently. "I'm sure it is, dear. But you're alive and that's what matters. Cameras can be replaced." As Lisa lay there, the full weight of her experience began to settle upon her. She had come face to face with the raw, untamed power of nature and survived. But the encounter had left more than just physical scars. Lisa knew that the memory of the bear's attack would stay with her for the rest of her life, a stark reminder of the thin line between life and death in the wilderness. Lisa drifted in and out of consciousness, the sterile hospital room fading in and out of focus. The pain medication dulled her senses, but couldn't entirely mask the throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from every part of her body. As she became more lucid, the gravity of her situation began to sink in. A gentle knock on the door roused her from her thoughts. A man in a park ranger uniform entered, his face etched with concern. "Ms. Harper, I'm Ranger Mike Dawson. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I need to ask you a few questions about the incident if you're up for it." Lisa nodded weakly, wincing as she tried to adjust her position in the bed. "I'll try my best," she said, her voice hoarse. Ranger Dawson pulled up a chair beside her bed, notebook in hand. "Can you tell me what happened out there?" Lisa closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she recalled the terrifying encounter. "I was photographing wildlife near Jenny Lake. I'd seen a grizzly the day before, but it was far away. I thought I was being careful." She recounted the events leading up to the attack, her voice trembling as she described the bear's charge and the moment it made contact. Ranger Dawson listened intently, jotting down notes. "You mentioned using bear spray," he said when she finished. "That likely saved your life. But I have to ask, why did you return to an area where you'd previously spotted a bear?" Lisa felt a wave of shame wash over her. I was trying to get the perfect shot. I've been a wildlife photographer for years, and I've never had an encounter like this. I guess I got overconfident." Ranger Dawson nodded, his expression softening. "It's a common mistake, even among experienced outdoors people. Bears are unpredictable, and even taking all the right precautions doesn't guarantee safety." He flipped through his notes, then looked back at Lisa. "We've increased patrols in the area where the attack occurred, but we haven't been able to locate the bear. Without physical evidence beyond your injuries, it's challenging to identify the specific animal responsible." Lisa's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means we can't take any action against this particular bear," Ranger Dawson explained. "We'll continue to monitor the area closely and warn visitors, but unless there's another incident, our hands are tied." The news hit Lisa hard. The bear that had nearly killed her was still out there, potentially a threat to other hikers and photographers. She felt a mix of fear and frustration bubbling up inside her. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "It just gets to roam free after what it did to me?" Ranger Dawson leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Ms. Harper, I understand your frustration, but it's important to remember that the bear was acting on instinct, defending what it perceived as its territory. We're the visitors in their habitat." Lisa knew he was right, but it did little to quell the anxiety churning in her stomach. She nodded silently, too overwhelmed to argue further. "I know this is a lot to process," Ranger Dawson continued. "We have resources available, counseling services that specialize in helping people who've been through wildlife encounters like yours. I highly recommend taking advantage of them." He stood to leave, pausing at the door. "One more thing, Ms. Harper. Your story, as it could help others. Would you be willing to share it? It might prevent someone else from making the same mistakes." Lisa hesitated, the thought of reliving the attack making her heart race. But she also saw the potential good it could do. "I'll think about it," she said finally. As the days passed, Lisa's physical wounds began to heal. The deep gashes left by the bear's claws and teeth were slowly closing, leaving angry red lines that would eventually fade to scars. But the emotional trauma proved harder to shake. Nightmares plagued her sleep, filled with the sound of crashing underbrush and the hot breath of the bear. She'd wake in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, convinced for a moment that she was back in that clearing, fighting for her life. During one particularly restless night, a nurse named Sarah found Lisa sitting up in bed, staring blankly out the Window. Can't sleep? Sarah asked gently, checking Lisa's vitals. Lisa shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there. I can feel its teeth, its claws. She trailed off, shuddering at the memory. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her presence comforting. Have you considered talking to someone about what happened? We have excellent trauma counselors here. I don't know, Lisa said hesitantly. I'm a photographer. I'm supposed to be the one observing, not being observed. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help, Sarah replied. You survived something incredible, Lisa. It's okay to need support in processing that. The next morning, Lisa agreed to meet with Dr. Elena Martinez, a psychologist specializing in trauma related to animal attacks. As she recounted her experience once again, Lisa found herself overcome with emotion. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, she said, wiping away tears. If I'd just stayed in the campground that day. Dr. Martinez nodded, understanding. It's natural to play the what-if game after a traumatic event, but it's important to remember that you're not to blame for the bear's actions. You're a survivor, Lisa. Over the next few weeks, Lisa continued her sessions with Dr. Martinez, slowly learning to process her emotions and cope with the lingering effects of the attack. She also began physical therapy, working to regain strength and mobility in her injured arm. As her discharge date approached, Lisa faced a new challenge, deciding what to do next. Her camera equipment was destroyed, and the thought of returning to wildlife photography filled her with anxiety. But it had been her passion for so long. Could she really give it up? One afternoon, as Lisa sat in the hospital garden, enjoying the fresh air, she overheard two young nurses discussing an upcoming camping trip. I can't wait to see the mountains, one said excitedly. I've never been hiking before. Just be careful, her friend replied. I heard there was a bear attack in Grand Teton last month. Some photographer got mauled pretty bad. Lisa felt a jolt go through her. Was that how people would remember her now? As just another cautionary tale? In that moment, she made a decision. She wouldn't let fear define her story. She'd use her experience to educate others, to help them appreciate the beauty of nature while respecting its dangers. With renewed determination, Lisa reached for her phone. She had a call to make to Ranger Dawson. It was time to share her story. As she dialed the number, Lisa felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. The bear may have taken her camera and left her with scars, but it hadn't taken her voice, and she intended to use it to make a difference. The hospital room felt smaller with each passing day as Lisa's discharge date approached. The stark white walls and the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment had become a strange sort of comfort, a cocoon shielding her from the outside world and the memories of her harrowing encounter. But now, as she packed her few belongings into a small duffel bag, reality began to set in. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Elena Martinez, her psychologist, entered with a warm smile. How are you feeling about leaving? Today, Lisa, she asked, taking a seat in the chair beside the bed. Lisa zipped up her bag, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. Honestly, I'm terrified, she admitted. In here, everything feels controlled, safe, out there. She trailed off, gesturing vaguely towards the window. Dr. Martinez nodded understandingly. It's normal to feel apprehensive. You've been through a traumatic experience, and your body and mind are still healing. But remember, you're stronger than you think. You survived the attack, and you've made incredible progress in your recovery. Lisa managed a small smile, appreciating the doctor's words even if she didn't fully believe them yet. I know, it's just, what do I do now? Photography has been my whole life, but the thought of going back out there, of potentially facing another bear, you don't have to make any big decisions right away, Dr. Martinez assured her. Give yourself time to readjust. And remember, we've discussed coping strategies for when those anxious thoughts arise. As they continued their conversation, a nurse entered with Lisa's discharge papers. The reality of leaving the hospital's protective bubble suddenly felt very immediate. Ms. Harper, the nurse said, handing her a stack of forms. Once you've signed these, you'll be free to go. Do you have someone picking you up? Lisa nodded. My sister's flying in from Denver. She should be here soon. As if on cue, there was another knock at the door. Lisa looked up to see her older sister Sarah standing in the doorway, concern etched on her face. "Oh, Liz," Sarah said, rushing to embrace her. Lisa winced slightly at the contact but welcomed the comfort of her sister's arms. "I'm okay, Sarah," Lisa assured her, though her voice wavered slightly. "Really?" Sarah pulled back, her eyes scanning. Lisa's face as if searching for signs of hidden pain. "When I got that call from the hospital, I was so scared. I can't believe this happened to you." As Lisa signed her discharge papers and gathered her things, Dr. Martinez pulled Sarah aside. "For a quiet word. Your sister has made remarkable progress," the doctor explained, "but she still has a long way to go, both physically and emotionally. She may experience nightmares, flashbacks, or anxiety attacks. The most important thing is to be patient and supportive." Sarah nodded solemnly, glancing over at Lisa. "I'll do whatever it takes to help her through this." The drive from the hospital to Lisa's apartment in Denver was filled with a tense silence. Lisa stared out the window, watching the landscape change from the rugged mountains of Wyoming to the familiar cityscape of home. Each mile seemed to bring a mix of relief and apprehension. As they pulled up to Lisa's building, Sarah broke the silence. "Are you sure you don't want to stay with me for a while? I've got plenty of room, and I could help out with—" "I'll be fine, Sarah," Lisa interrupted, perhaps a bit too sharply. Seeing her sister's hurt expression, she softened her tone. "I appreciate the offer, really, but I need to face this, to prove to myself that I can do it." Inside her apartment, Lisa was struck by how unchanged everything was. Her photography equipment still sat in the corner, waiting for a trip that would never happen now. Framed nature prints, including several of bears, adorned the walls. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as she looked at them. "Do you want me to take those down?" Sarah asked, noticing Lisa's discomfort. Lisa shook her head. "No, leave them. I can't hide from it forever." As the days passed, Lisa struggled to find a new normal. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or checking the mail became anxiety-inducing ordeals. Every unexpected noise made her jump, her mind immediately conjuring images of the bear's charge. One afternoon, as Lisa sat at her computer, staring blankly at her email inbox, a message caught her eye. The subject line read, "Your story, Grand Teton National Park." With trembling fingers, Lisa opened the email. It was from Ranger Mike Dawson. "Dear Ms. Harper, I hope this email finds you well and recovering. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about sharing your experience. The Park Service is putting together a new safety campaign, and we believe your story could be a powerful tool in educating visitors about wildlife safety. Would you be willing to participate in a short video interview about your encounter? Your insights could help prevent similar incidents in the future. Please let me know if you're interested or if you have any questions. Best regards, Ranger Mike." "Dawson," Lisa read the email several times, her heart racing. The thought of reliving the attack on camera filled her with dread. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that this could be an opportunity, a way to reclaim her narrative and potentially help others. After a long moment of internal debate, Lisa began to type her reply. "Dear Ranger Dawson, thank you for reaching out. I've given your request a lot of thought, and while the idea of discussing my experience publicly is daunting, I understand the importance of educating others about wildlife safety. I'm willing to participate in the video interview. However, I have a few conditions." As Lisa outlined her terms, including having final approval on the edited video and the option to stop the interview at any time if it became too overwhelming, she felt a small spark of something she hadn't experienced since the attack: purpose. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Lisa worked with Dr. Martinez to develop coping strategies for the interview, practicing deep breathing exercises and grounding techniques to manage her anxiety. On the day of the interview, Lisa found herself back in Grand Teton National Park, though this time in the safety of the visitor center. As the park's media team set up cameras and lighting, Ranger Dawson approached her. "How are you feeling, Ms. Harper?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Lisa took a deep breath, centering herself. "Nervous," she admitted, "but ready, I think." As the cameras began rolling, Lisa surprised herself with her composure. She recounted the events leading up to the attack, her voice steady as she described the bear's charge and her desperate fight for survival. "What would you say to other visitors who might be tempted to get that perfect wildlife shot?" the interviewer asked. Lisa paused, considering her words carefully. "I'd tell them that no photograph is worth your life. Nature is beautiful, but it's also unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. Respect the wildlife, keep your distance, and always prioritize safety over getting the shot." As the interview concluded, Lisa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced her fears, shared her story, and hopefully would help prevent others from making the same mistakes she had. Ranger Dawson approached her after the cameras stopped rolling, a look of admiration on his face. "That was incredibly brave, Ms. Harper. Your story will make a real difference." Lisa managed a small smile, feeling a glimmer of her old confidence returning. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it." As she left the visitor center, Lisa paused to look out over the stunning landscape of Grand Teton National Park. The mountains still towered majestically, the forest still teemed with life. But now, she saw it all with new eyes that recognized both the beauty and the inherent wildness of nature. She might never again capture these scenes through her camera lens, but in sharing her story, Lisa had found a new way to frame the delicate balance between humans and wildlife. It wasn't the path she had envisioned for herself, but as she took in the breathtaking view before her, Lisa realized it was a path worth exploring. As the sun began its descent behind the towering peaks of the Teton Range, Lisa Harper found herself facing a daunting challenge. The forest, once a sanctuary of beauty and inspiration, now loomed before her as a labyrinth of potential dangers. Each shadow seemed to conceal a threat. Every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through her battered body. But she had no choice. She had to find her way back to safety. Lisa's legs trembled with each step, a combination of physical exhaustion and lingering shock from the bear attack. The taste of copper lingered in her mouth, a stark reminder of the violence she had just endured. Her torn clothing clung to her skin, sticky with drying blood and sweat. "Keep moving," she muttered to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Just keep moving. But which way was safety? In the chaos of the attack and her desperate flight, Lisa had lost all sense of direction. The familiar trails she had confidently traversed just hours ago now seemed alien and hostile. Every tree looked the same, every clearing a potential dead end. As she stumbled through the underbrush, Lisa's mind raced with fragmented memories of wilderness survival tips. Stay calm, find water, follow it downstream. But calm was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with the phantom sensation of the bear's hot breath still on her neck. A sharp pain in her side caused Lisa to gasp and lean against a nearby tree. She lifted her shredded shirt gingerly, revealing an angry red gash along her ribs. It didn't look deep, but the risk of infection in these conditions was high. "God, what I wouldn't give for a first aid kit right now," Lisa said to the empty forest. As if in response, a distant crack echoed through the trees. Lisa froze, her heart pounding in her ears. Was it the bear coming back to finish what it started? Or perhaps a rescue party? She held her breath, straining to hear any follow-up sounds. Silence. After what felt like an eternity, Lisa forced herself to keep moving. The light was fading fast, and the thought of being trapped in these woods after dark was too terrifying to contemplate. As she picked her way through a particularly dense thicket, Lisa's foot caught on an exposed root. She tumbled forward, unable to catch herself with her injured arms. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent fresh waves of pain through her battered body. For a moment, Lisa lay there, face down in the dirt and decaying leaves. A sob of frustration and fear escaped her lips. It would be so easy to give up, to let the forest claim her. But the thought of her family, of the life she had waiting for her beyond these trees, gave her the strength to push herself up. As she rose to her knees, something caught her eye, a flash of unnatural color among the browns and greens of the forest floor. With trembling hands, Lisa brushed away the leaves, revealing a crumpled candy wrapper. "People," she breathed, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. "People have been here." With renewed determination, Lisa scanned the area. There, barely visible in the fading light, was a faint trail worn into the forest floor. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign of human presence she'd seen since fleeing the bear. Lisa followed the trail with painstaking slowness, every sense on high alert. The forest grew darker around her, the shadows lengthening into ominous shapes. Nocturnal creatures began to stir, their calls adding to Lisa's growing unease. Just as she was beginning to lose hope, a sound cut through the gathering gloom. Voices, distant but unmistakably human. Lisa's heart leapt. "Hello," she called out, her voice hoarse and weak. "Is anyone there? Please, I need help." For a terrifying moment there was no response. Then, miraculously, an answering shout. "Hello, who's there?" Lisa could have wept with relief. "Here, I'm over here. I've been attacked by a bear. Please help." The sound of crashing underbrush grew louder as someone approached. Then, suddenly, a beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating Lisa's battered form. "Oh my God," a male voice exclaimed. The flashlight beam wavered as its owner took in Lisa's condition. "Honey, call the Rangers. We need medical evac now." As the man approached, Lisa felt her legs give way. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fading fast, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. "It's okay, you're safe now," the man said, catching Lisa before she could fall. "I'm Tom, my wife Jenny is calling for help. Can you tell me your name?" "Lisa," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lisa Harper." "Okay, Lisa, just hang on, help is on the way." As Tom helped her to a clearing where a small campfire burned, Lisa caught sight of his wife, Jenny, speaking urgently into a satellite phone. The normality of the campsite, the tent, the cooking equipment, the folding chairs, seemed surreal after her ordeal in the wilderness. "Tom, they're sending a helicopter," Jenny reported, ending the call. "It should be here in about 20 minutes. She turned to Lisa, her face etched with concern. "You poor thing, what happened?" Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but found she couldn't form the words. The events of the day crashed over her like a wave, and she began to shake uncontrollably. "It's okay, you don't have to talk about it now," Jenny soothed, draping a warm blanket over Lisa's shoulders. "You're safe. That's what matters." As they waited for the rescue helicopter, Tom and Jenny did their best to make Lisa comfortable. They offered her water, which she drank greedily, and tried to clean some of her more accessible wounds with their first aid kit. The sound of helicopter blades cutting through the night sky was the sweetest thing Lisa had ever heard. As the aircraft landed in a nearby clearing, disgorging park rangers and medical personnel, Lisa felt the last of her strength give way. "Thank you," she murmured to Tom and Jenny as the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher. "Thank you for finding me." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Lisa to safety and medical attention, she cast one last look at the dark forest below. Somewhere down there, the bear that had nearly taken her life was still roaming free. Lisa closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. She had survived against all odds. But as the helicopter sped towards civilization, Lisa knew that her journey was far from over. The forest may have released her from its grasp, but the memories of this day would not be so easily left behind. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment filled the air as Lisa slowly regained consciousness. Her eyelids felt heavy, and it took considerable effort to open them. As her vision cleared, she found herself in a sterile hospital room, the walls a stark white that seemed to amplify the fluorescent lighting. "Welcome back, Miss Harper," a gentle voice said. Lisa turned her head slightly to see a nurse adjusting her IV drip. "How are you feeling?" Lisa tried to speak, but her throat was dry and sore. The nurse quickly offered her a cup of water with a straw, which Lisa gratefully accepted. "Where am I?" Lisa managed to croak out after taking a few sips. "You're in Jackson Hole Hospital," the nurse explained. "You were brought in by helicopter last night. Do you remember what happened?" The memories came flooding back. The bear, the attack, her desperate journey through the forest. Lisa nodded weakly, fighting back tears as the emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "The doctor will be in shortly to discuss your condition," the nurse said, patting Lisa's hand gently. "Try to rest for now." As promised, a doctor arrived a short while later, introducing himself as Dr. Evan Chen. He carried a clipboard and wore a serious expression as he approached Lisa's bedside. "Miss Harper, I'm glad to see you're awake. You've been through quite an ordeal, Dr. Chen began. I'd like to go over your injuries with you, if that's all right. Lisa nodded, bracing herself for the news. You've sustained multiple lacerations and puncture wounds, primarily on your arms, back, and sides, Dr. Chen explained, his tone professional but compassionate. We've cleaned and stitched these wounds, but we'll need to monitor them closely for infection. You also have a mild concussion, 2 cracked ribs, and a sprained left wrist. Lisa listened in stunned silence, the full extent of her injuries sinking in. Additionally, Dr. Chen continued, you've lost a significant amount of blood. We've given you a transfusion which has stabilized your condition. However, you're still at risk for complications, so we'll be keeping you here for observation. For at least a few days. What about... Lisa hesitated, almost afraid to ask, will there be permanent damage? Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Most of your injuries should heal with time and proper care. However, you will likely have some scarring, particularly on your arms where the bear's teeth made contact. We can discuss options for minimizing the appearance of these scars once you're further along in your recovery. As Dr. Chen finished explaining her treatment plan, there was a knock at the door. A man in a park ranger uniform entered, removing his hat as he approached the bed. Ms. Harper, I'm Ranger Mike Dawson from Grand Teton National Park. I hope I'm not intruding, but I needed to speak with you about the incident. Dr. Chen excused himself, leaving Lisa alone with the ranger. First off, I want to say how relieved we are that you survived, Ranger Dawson began, pulling up a chair beside the bed. What you went through, well, not many people walk away from an encounter like that. Lisa managed a weak smile. I'm not sure I did much walking. More like crawling. Ranger Dawson chuckled softly, appreciating her attempt at humor despite the circumstances. Ms. Harper, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened. It's important for our records and for the safety of other park visitors. Are you up for that? Lisa nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She recounted the events leading up to the attack, describing the bear's sudden appearance and her futile attempts to escape. Ranger Dawson listened, intently jotting down notes in a small notebook. You mentioned you had bear spray, he said when she finished. Were you able to use it? Lisa nodded. Yes, but it didn't seem to do much good. The bear just kept coming. Ranger Dawson's brow furrowed. That's unusual. Bear spray is typically very effective. It's possible the wind direction affected its potency, or perhaps this particular bear had a previous encounter that made it less susceptible. He closed his notebook, his expression turning serious. Ms. Harper, I want you to know that we're taking this incident very seriously. We've increased patrols in the area where the attack occurred, and we're warning visitors to be extra cautious. Will you try to find the bear? Lisa asked hesitantly. Ranger Dawson sighed. We'll certainly be on the lookout for it, but identifying a specific bear without clear evidence is challenging, and even if we could, euthanizing the animal would be a last resort. Bears are a vital part of the park's ecosystem, and they're typically not aggressive unless provoked or surprised. Lisa felt a mix of emotions at this news, relief that the bear might be spared, but also a lingering fear knowing it was still out there. I understand, she said softly. I don't want the bear to be killed. It was just being a bear, I guess. I was the one in its territory. Ranger Dawson nodded approvingly. That's a very mature perspective, Ms. Harper. Many people in your position would be calling for the bear's head. Your attitude will go a long way in helping us maintain the delicate balance between wildlife conservation and visitor safety. As he stood to leave, Ranger Dawson paused. One more thing, Ms. Harper. Your experience, as traumatic as it was, could be invaluable in educating other visitors about wildlife safety. Once you're feeling up to it, would you consider allowing us to share your story as part of our safety programs? Lisa hesitated, the thought of reliving the attack making her heart race, but she also saw the potential good it could do. I'll think about it, she said finally. Ranger Dawson thanked her for her time and left, leaving Lisa alone with her thoughts. As she lay there, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She was alive against all odds, but the road to recovery, both physical and emotional, would be long and challenging. Lisa's gaze fell on her bandaged arms, evidence of her brush with death. She knew that beneath those bandages, scars were forming, permanent reminders of her encounter with the wild. But as she thought about Ranger Dawson's request, she realized that perhaps these scars could serve a purpose. They could be a testament to survival, a warning to others, and maybe, just maybe, a way to find meaning in this traumatic experience. As exhaustion began to overtake her, Lisa closed her eyes. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to think about the future. It was uncertain and somewhat frightening, but she was alive to face it. And for now, that was enough. The days following Lisa's arrival at the hospital blurred together in a haze of pain medication, medical procedures, and fitful sleep plagued by nightmares. As her physical wounds began to heal, the emotional trauma of her encounter with the grizzly bear lingered, casting a shadow over her recovery. One morning, about a week after the attack, Lisa awoke to find a familiar face in her hospital room. Ranger Mike Dawson stood by the window, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Good morning, Ms. Harper," he said, noticing she was awake. "I hope I'm not intruding. How are you feeling?" Lisa pushed herself up slightly, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "I've been better," she admitted, "but I suppose I should be grateful I'm feeling anything at all." Ranger Dawson nodded solemnly. "You're a survivor, that's for sure. Listen, I wanted to follow up on our conversation about sharing your story. Have you given it any more thought?" Lisa hesitated. The idea of reliving her traumatic experience still filled her with dread, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her ordeal could serve a greater purpose. "I have," she said slowly. "And I think I want to do it. If it can help prevent someone else from going through what I did, then it's worth it." Relief washed over Ranger Dawson's face. "That's great news, Ms. Harper. Your story could make a real difference in our wildlife safety education programs." As they discussed the details of how Lisa's experience would be incorporated into the park's safety initiatives, a knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Chen entered, followed by a woman Lisa didn't recognize. "Good morning, Lisa," Dr. Chen said. "I hope we're not interrupting. This is Dr. Sarah Goldstein, one of our staff psychologists. Given the nature of your experience, we thought it might be helpful for you to talk with her." Lisa felt a flicker of resistance at the idea of therapy, but she pushed it aside. She knew she needed help processing what had happened to her. "Doctor," Goldstein stepped forward, her warm smile putting Lisa at ease. "It's nice to meet you, Lisa. I specialize in helping people who have been through traumatic events, particularly those involving wildlife encounters. Would you be open to chatting with me for a bit?" Lisa nodded, and the others excused themselves, leaving her alone with Dr. Goldstein. Over the next hour, Lisa found herself opening up about her experience in a way she hadn't been able to before. She described not just the physical attack, but the overwhelming fear, the certainty that she was going to die, and the guilt she felt for putting herself in that situation. "It's common for survivors of animal attacks to experience a range of emotions," Dr. Goldstein explained. "Fear, anger, guilt, they're all normal responses to trauma. What you're feeling doesn't make you weak, Lisa. It makes you human." As their session came to an end, Dr. Goldstein suggested a technique for managing the flashbacks and anxiety Lisa had been experiencing. "When you feel a panic attack coming on, I want you to focus on your senses," she instructed. "Find 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. This can help ground you in the present moment." Lisa practiced the technique, feeling some of her anxiety ebb away as she focused on her immediate surroundings. For the first time since the attack, she felt a glimmer of hope that she might be able to move past this traumatic event. Later that afternoon, Lisa received another visitor. A young woman with a press badge entered her room, introducing herself as Jamie Torres from the Jackson Hole News and Guide. "Ms. Harper, I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your encounter in Grand Teton," Jamie said, her notebook at the ready. "Your story has garnered quite a bit of local interest." Lisa hesitated, looking to Ranger Dawson, who had remained in the room. He nodded encouragingly. "It's up to you, Ms. Harper," he said. "But sharing your story with the local paper could help spread awareness about wildlife safety." Taking a deep breath, Lisa agreed to the interview. She recounted her experience once again, this time focusing on the mistakes she had made and the lessons she had learned. "I got complacent," she admitted to Jamie. "I'd been around wildlife so many times before I thought I knew what I was doing. But nature is unpredictable. No photo is worth risking your life." As Jamie jotted down notes, she asked, "What would you say to other photographers or hikers who might be tempted to get too close to wildlife for that perfect shot?" Lisa thought for a moment before responding. "I'd tell them that the most important piece of equipment they can bring into the wilderness isn't a camera, it's respect. Respect for the animals, respect for the environment, and respect for their own limitations. The wilderness isn't a zoo or a theme park. It's beautiful, but it can also be dangerous if you're not prepared and vigilant." After the interview concluded, Lisa felt drained, but also somewhat empowered. Sharing her story, as difficult as it was, gave her a sense of purpose. She was no longer just a victim. She was a voice for wildlife safety. As the day drew to a close, Lisa found herself alone in her hospital room, reflecting on all that had transpired. Her body ached, and the emotional wounds were still raw, but she felt a newfound determination growing within her. She reached for her phone, opening her photo gallery. There, among the countless nature shots she had taken over the years, was the last image she had captured before the bear attack, a distant shot of the grizzly, peaceful and majestic in its natural habitat. Lisa's finger hovered over the delete button for a moment. This photo had nearly cost her her life, but instead of deleting it, she found herself setting it as her phone's background. A reminder, she murmured to herself. Not just of the danger she had faced, but of the respect and caution she would carry with her from now on. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Lisa's dreams were not of teeth and claws, but of wide-open spaces and the beauty of nature viewed from a respectful distance. She knew her recovery, both physical and emotional, was far from over, but for the first time since the attack, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Weeks had passed since Lisa Harper's harrowing encounter with the grizzly bear in Grand Teton National Park. The physical scars were healing, leaving raised pink lines across her arms and torso, permanent reminders of her brush with death. The emotional scars, while less visible, were slowly mending too, thanks to regular therapy sessions and the unwavering support of her family and friends. Lisa sat at her desk in her Denver apartment, staring at her computer screen. She felt a mix of emotions. Her finger hovered over the mouse, cursor poised above the send button. She had just finished writing a detailed account of her experience for a popular photography blog, and now she hesitated, wondering if she was really ready to share her story with the world. A gentle knock on her apartment door broke her reverie. "Come in," Lisa called out, recognizing her sister Sarah's distinctive pattern. Sarah entered carrying a bag of groceries. "Hey sis, how's the writing going?" Lisa sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I think it's done, but I don't know if I can hit send. It feels so exposed." Sarah set the groceries down and came to stand behind Lisa, reading over her shoulder. "Lisa, this is powerful stuff. Your honesty about what happened, the mistakes you made, the lessons you learned, it could really help people." "I know," Lisa replied, running a hand through her hair. "It's just, once it's out there, I can't take it back. And what if people think I'm an idiot for getting myself into that situation?" Sarah squeezed her sister's shoulder gently. "Anyone who spent time in the wilderness knows how easily things can go wrong. You're not an idiot. You're human. And you're brave for sharing your story." Taking a deep breath, Lisa nodded. "You're right. Okay, here goes nothing." She clicked the send button, watching as the email disappeared into the digital ether. Over the next few days, Lisa was overwhelmed by the response to her blog post. Comments poured in from fellow photographers, hikers, and outdoor enthusiasts, many sharing their own close calls with wildlife and thanking Lisa for her candor. One evening, as Lisa was scrolling through the comments, her phone rang. The caller's ID showed an unfamiliar number with a Wyoming area code. "Hello?" she answered hesitantly. "Ms. Harper, this is Ranger Mike Dawson from Grand Teton National Park. I hope I'm not bothering you." Lisa sat up straighter, surprised to hear from him. "Not at all, Ranger Dawson. What can I do for you?" "Well, I wanted to let you know that we've seen your blog post making the rounds online. It's generated quite a buzz in the outdoor community. In fact, we've had several inquiries from people wanting to know more about our wildlife safety programs. Lisa felt a warmth spread through her chest. Really, that's amazing. It is, Ranger Dawson agreed, and it's got us thinking. We are planning a series of wildlife safety workshops for the upcoming season, and we were wondering if you'd be interested in participating as a guest speaker. The request caught Lisa off guard. Me? A speaker? I don't know, Ranger Dawson. I'm not sure I'm qualified. On the contrary, Ms. Harper, your experience combined with your ability to articulate the lessons you've learned makes you uniquely qualified. People relate to personal stories far more than they do to dry safety. Lectures. Lisa found herself considering the offer. The thought of returning to the park, of facing the place where she'd nearly lost her life, was daunting. But the idea that she could potentially prevent others from making the same mistakes she had was compelling. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, Ranger Dawson replied. Take all the time you need. Just know that we believe your voice could make a real difference. After hanging up, Lisa sat in silence for a long moment, turning the offer over in her mind. Then, almost without conscious thought, she found herself reaching for her camera bag. It had sat untouched in the corner of her apartment since her return from the hospital, a silent reminder of her traumatic experience. Lisa unzipped the bag, pulling out her backup camera, the one that hadn't been destroyed in the bear attack. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its familiar weight and contours. For the first time since the incident, she felt a flicker of the old excitement that photography had always brought her. Making a decision, Lisa grabbed her phone and dialed Sarah's number. Hey sis, what's up? Sarah answered. How do you feel about a road trip to Wyoming? Lisa asked, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure you're ready for that? Lisa took a deep breath. I think I am. I can't let fear control me forever. And if I can help others stay safe while reconnecting with my passion, well, isn't that worth facing those fears? Sarah's voice was filled with pride when she responded. It absolutely is. Count me in. Over the next few months, Lisa worked closely with the Park Service to develop her presentation for the wildlife safety workshops. She pored over research on bear behavior, consulted with wildlife biologists, and refined her own story to emphasize the key safety lessons. When the day of the first workshop arrived, Lisa stood at the edge of the auditorium, peering out at the gathering crowd. Her palms were sweaty and her heart raced, but it wasn't just nerves she felt. There was excitement too, and a sense of purpose. Ranger Dawson appeared at her side. Ready, Miss Harper? Lisa nodded, clutching her notes. As I'll ever be. As she stepped onto the stage, the audience fell silent. Lisa looked out at the sea of faces, outdoor enthusiasts, amateur photographers, families planning their first wilderness adventures. She saw in them the same love for nature that had driven her own adventures, and the same potential for tragedy, if that love wasn't tempered with respect and caution. Good morning, she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. My name is Lisa Harper, and I'm here to talk to you about the day a grizzly bear nearly killed me, and more importantly, how you can avoid finding yourself in the same situation. As Lisa shared her story, she could see the impact it was having on her audience. People leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, absorbing every word. When she finished, the questions came rapid fire, and Lisa found herself drawing on all she had learned to provide thoughtful, informative answers. After the workshop, as people filed out of the auditorium, many stopped to thank Lisa personally. One young woman, clutching a high-end camera, approached with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I've taken so many risks to get the perfect shot. I never really understood the danger until hearing your story. You've changed how I'll approach wildlife photography forever. Lisa felt a lump form in her throat. Thank you for listening, she managed to say. Stay safe out there. As the last of the attendees left, Ranger Dawson approached Lisa with a broad smile. That was incredible, Ms. Harper. You've got a real gift for this. Lisa felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. She had faced her fears, shared her story, and potentially saved lives in the process. As she packed up her materials, her gaze drifted to the window where the majestic Teton Range loomed in the distance. For the first time since the attack, Lisa felt a familiar stirring, the desire to capture the beauty of the natural world through her lens. But this time, that desire was tempered with a deep respect for the wilderness and its inhabitants. She picked up her camera, weighing it in her hands. The scars on her arms caught the light, a permanent reminder of the lessons she'd learned. With a small smile, Lisa raised the camera to her eye, focusing on the distant peaks. Click. The sound of the shutter was like coming home. Lisa Harper, wildlife photographer and survivor, was ready to embrace her passion once again, this time with a newfound wisdom that would guide her every step in the wilderness.